They told you stress is just part of life, that it means you're working hard, that it's normal to feel overwhelmed, drained, always behind. But if that's true, why does it feel like your mind is always racing? Why does peace feel so far away? Why does it feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough? They lied. Stress isn't a sign of success. It's a sign of disconnection from yourself, from the present moment, from the truth. And Buddhism has known this all along. For over 2,500 years, it's been quietly carrying the antidote to modern life. Not in loud promises, but in stillness, in clarity, in a deeper kind of freedom. The Buddha didn't teach happiness through more. He taught it through less clinging, less noise, less pretending. He taught how to meet suffering without fear, how to sit with discomfort without being crushed by it. He taught how to let go, not by force, but by seeing clearly. And when you see clearly, stress starts to dissolve on its own. Tonight, that's exactly what's going to happen. As you listen to these teachings, your nervous system will soften. The tension in your chest will begin to fade. Thoughts that used to pull you under will lose their grip. And somewhere in the quiet, a shift will happen, not loud, but real. You'll feel it in your breath, in your body, in your heart. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is ancient wisdom, speaking directly to the part of you that's tired of carrying so much. It's not about escaping stress. It's about outgrowing it. Are you ready? Let's begin. There's a moment before every transformation where something inside feels heavy, unsettled, almost too loud to ignore. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like friction. This is where most people give up, turn away, or numb out. But what if this is where freedom actually begins? What if everything we've been trying to get rid of was never meant to be pushed away, but looked at clearly, gently, and without fear? What comes next isn't easy, but it's real. And in a world full of noise, real is rare. Let's begin. Stress builds when discomfort is treated like a problem to be solved. The tension grows every time discomfort is labeled wrong, dangerous, or broken. But discomfort itself is not the enemy. It's a signal. It speaks in a language deeper than words, and underneath its sharp edges, it's holding something most people never stop to see: truth. When the body tenses and the breath shortens, it's not just reacting to life, it's trying to protect you. But what if it doesn't need to protect you from the moment? What if the real pain comes from trying to resist it? Buddhism doesn't teach us how to avoid discomfort. It teaches us how to turn toward it. Not as a punishment, not as a test, but as a doorway to something more honest. Discomfort only multiplies when it's rejected. It sharpens when it's ignored. And it loops endlessly when we treat it like an intruder rather than a messenger. The first shift happens not through control, but through contact. The contact of attention, the quiet power of presence, the kind that watches discomfort, not with judgment, but with interest. The moment discomfort is seen without trying to escape it, it starts to unfold. It doesn't disappear, but it loses its teeth. Stress isn't built in the raw sensation. It's built in the story around it. Thoughts like, "This will never end," "Something's wrong with me," or "I need this to stop," aren't neutral. They add heat. They turn a flicker of pain into a wildfire of suffering. The mind's resistance wraps around the feeling and pulls it tighter. That's where the real grip is. But when those stories are no longer fed, the cycle breaks. And what remains is something strange and quiet. Just sensation, just breath, just the truth of the body in this one moment. The Buddha spoke of suffering not to scare us, but to show us where we're holding on. And it turns out we're holding on everywhere. In our expectations, in our identity, in our quiet hopes that life will always go the way we want. Discomfort exposes these attachments. It shows us what we cling to, what we fear, and what we believe we need to feel okay. But none of those things are solid. None of them are permanent. And when discomfort pulls them to the surface, there's a rare opportunity to let them go. Not by force, but by clarity. Awareness doesn't fight what it sees. It simply sees it. This is where discomfort begins to change form. It becomes less of a problem and more of a process. And that shift, when you stop trying to fix the feeling and instead allow yourself to feel it fully, is the moment everything softens. Maybe not the sensation, maybe not the tension, but the need to control it, the pressure to have it be different. That's what dissolves. And when that pressure drops, the stress does too. Discomfort is not a failure of practice. It is the practice, the raw material of growth. The mud the lotus grows from. The body knows this before the mind does. In the stillness, in the watching, in the breath-meeting sensation, the system slowly relearns that it's safe to feel, safe to stay, safe to soften. No forced courage, just honest contact. And that's what heals. Most people think peace means always feeling good. But real peace is the ability to feel anything without running away. That's why monks spend years in silence, not to escape pain, but to meet it with clean attention. It's why meditation isn't about bliss, it's about stability. Can you sit with a restless body? Can you stay with a tight chest? Can you let discomfort rise, peak and fall without moving to avoid it? Not as a challenge, not to prove anything, but simply to witness what happens when presence becomes the default. When awareness holds discomfort, the nervous system responds. It drops out of defense mode. It learns there's nothing it needs to fight, no escape it needs to plan. Even the breath changes. It becomes less about control and more about flow. The body stops bracing, the mind stops spinning, and space opens up. In that space, the stress no longer has a grip. It's not that it disappears, it just no longer runs the show. In early Buddhist texts, discomfort is often compared to fire. It burns when touched without awareness. But when watched carefully, it becomes a source of light. It can't be handled recklessly, but it can be approached skillfully. Not every fire needs to be put out. Some need to be understood. The difference lies in how close you're willing to get without losing yourself in the flame. People often ask what to do with difficult emotions. The answer, from a Buddhist lens, is simple but not easy. Feel them, let them rise, watch them fall, without naming them as good or bad, without pushing or pulling. Emotions are not enemies, they're passing guests, and they don't ask for solutions, they ask for space. Discomfort is never permanent, but resistance is what stretches it out. When discomfort is allowed to be exactly what it is, it moves through the body like a storm. It comes, it passes, and it leaves behind something clean, something steady, not comfort necessarily, but clarity, the kind that doesn't need to hold on so tightly. Clarity is what stress fears the most, because clarity doesn't react. It listens. It holds. It allows things to be just as they are. And that kind of inner stillness is more powerful than any quick fix. It takes practice, yes, but not the kind of practice that demands perfection, the kind that demands presence. Presence is the antidote to stress, not pleasure, not escape, not distraction, but being fully where you are, even when where you are feels sharp, even when the moment itches to be avoided, even when your whole system says anywhere but here. Because the truth is, here is the only place anything can actually shift. Not later, not after things get better, but here, in this breath, in this body, in this discomfort that you're finally willing to feel. Buddhism calls this willingness right effort. Not forcing, not fixing, but showing up with honesty, over and over, without the need to succeed, just the intention to be fully with what is. Right effort softens the grip of stress because it removes the pressure to always feel okay. It replaces the question, how do I stop this, with, can I be with this? That question opens doors. It changes the shape of the nervous system. It builds inner trust. Because the more you meet discomfort with presence, the more your whole being starts to believe that it's safe to feel, safe to stay, safe to let the waves come and go without clinging to the shore. This is not weakness. This is not giving up. This is strength without tension. This is power without pressure. The Buddha called it the middle way, not denying discomfort, not drowning in it, but walking straight through with steady feet and clear eyes. Stress loses its grip when the fight ends, when the story ends, when the mind stops spinning and starts watching. The body follows, the breath finds its rhythm, and even in the middle of pain, there's a kind of rest. Not sleep, not numbness, but the rest that comes from no longer needing to resist the truth. Discomfort becomes a teacher. Not the kind that speaks loudly, but the kind that shows you where you're still hiding. It reveals what still feels threatening, what's still unhealed. And that revelation is not cruelty. It's clarity, not because it feels good, but because it sets you free. And freedom doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like breath. Sometimes it looks like tears. Sometimes it looks like finally letting yourself feel what you've been avoiding for years. Because on the other side of that feeling is not more suffering. It's spaciousness. It's a nervous system that no longer flinches. It's a heart that no longer hides. That is the Dhamma of discomfort, not the removal of pain, but the removal of the belief that pain is a problem. The slow, steady unwinding of all the stories that say, I can't handle this. The return to the truth that you already are handling it, breath by breath, presence by presence. And maybe that's what you needed to hear all along. That nothing is wrong with you for feeling discomfort, that your stress doesn't mean you're broken, that turning toward the hard things isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The wisdom to stop running, the wisdom to stay, the wisdom to know that discomfort doesn't mean danger. It means something inside is asking to be seen. Let it be seen. And as it rises and moves and eventually falls, notice what's left. Not the stress, not the fear, but the strength that was always underneath. Silent, still, waiting. There's a moment after facing discomfort when something unexpected happens. Not a dramatic breakthrough, but a quiet unfolding. The breath deepens. The heart doesn't race as fast. The mind becomes just a little more still. But even in that stillness, a deeper pain may surface, one that lives beyond the body, one that sits in the soul. Grief, loss, loneliness, the kind of suffering that no amount of stillness alone can solve. This is where something more than presence is needed. This is where perspective begins to matter, not a forced optimism, but a widening of awareness, a remembrance that what feels personal may actually be shared. Not because pain isn't real, but because it isn't yours alone. The teachings of the Buddha were never meant to make people feel separate. They were meant to reveal connection. And one of the clearest, most tender examples of this truth lives in a simple story passed down through generations. A mother, a child, a mustard seed. It starts in loss, but it ends in something far greater, understanding. A kind of wisdom that softens grief not by removing it, but by opening it wide enough to see the world inside it. In this story, a mother loses her only child. Her world collapses. Grief wraps around her like a shadow that won't let go. She carries the lifeless body of her child from house to house, begging anyone she can find to give her medicine, anything that might bring him back. No one can help her. Her suffering is unbearable, and it's isolating. In her eyes, no one has ever felt what she's feeling. No one could possibly understand the weight she's carrying. This is how personal pain always feels at first, like a prison no one else has entered. Eventually, someone sends her to the Buddha. She arrives trembling, eyes filled with desperation, heart filled with a last thread of hope. She begs him for a cure. And the Buddha, instead of offering a prayer or a chant or a potion, tells her to bring him a single mustard seed. But there's one condition. It must come from a household untouched by death. The woman agrees and rushes out, clinging to the task as if it were a promise. She goes from door to door, asking for a mustard seed and asking the same question: has death ever visited this house? One by one, the answers come. Yes, a parent, a child, a sibling, a friend. Every home carries its own story, and slowly her desperation begins to shift. The grief is still there, but it's no longer alone. Each story opens her eyes a little more. Her pain, once felt as singular, begins to feel shared. And in that recognition, something breaks, but not her heart. The illusion of being the only one breaks. The belief that suffering had singled her out shatters, and what remains is not relief, but understanding. This story is not just about death. It's about how we carry the weight of stress and pain as if it's uniquely ours, as if no one else could possibly understand what we're going through. But every human heart has known loss. Every life has felt grief. Every soul has, at some point, carried the unbearable. And when that truth is remembered, not just intellectually, but viscerally, it does something strange to suffering. It doesn't erase it, but it loosens its grip. Stress often hides inside the feeling of separation, the sense that my struggle is different, that my pain is worse, that no one else could feel what I feel. This isolation amplifies suffering. It traps people in the belief that their emotional pain is a personal flaw or a cosmic punishment. Buddhism doesn't dismiss that pain, it expands it, not to overwhelm, but to connect. Because the more pain is seen as part of the shared human story, the less tightly it defines the individual self. This is the beauty of the mustard seed. It's not a magical object, it's a mirror. The task wasn't about curing the boy, it was about curing the illusion that grief is private, that stress is special, that pain belongs to one and not to all. And when that illusion breaks, it doesn't make the pain vanish, but it makes it lighter to carry. There's a kind of healing that doesn't come from fixing anything. It comes from realizing that nothing needs to be fixed. That grief is not a sign of weakness. That stress is not a failure. That being overwhelmed doesn't mean being broken. It means being human. And in the quiet space between one mustard seed and another, the mother in the story slowly remembers that. She doesn't get her son back, but she gets something else, solid ground. The ground of reality shared by every person who has ever lived and loved and lost. This kind of realization has a power beyond explanation. It dissolves the walls that stress builds. It breaks through the mental story that says, I shouldn't feel this way. Instead, it replaces it with the understanding, of course I feel this way, and so have others, and so will others. Not as a dismissal of pain, but as a softening of it, as a way of honoring it without drowning in it. Modern stress often comes wrapped in the language of self-focus. My success, my anxiety, my trauma, my healing. This inward lens can create a narrow tunnel where only the self exists and where every failure feels personal and every struggle feels permanent. But the Buddha's teachings gently pull the lens back. They widen the frame. They remind us that the emotions we carry have been carried before, that the thoughts we think are not original, that the heartbreak we feel echoes through generations. And in that echo, there is company, not in words, but in presence. The wisdom in the mustard seed parable is not just in the teaching, it's in the method. The Buddha didn't tell the mother that others suffer. He let her discover it, because knowing something with the mind is not the same as knowing it in the bones. That's the kind of knowing that changes a person. That's the kind of understanding that shifts the shape of stress. When the nervous system no longer believes it's fighting alone, it calms. When the heart feels accompanied, it softens. When the soul sees itself reflected in others, it stops screaming for attention. Shared humanity doesn't mean we all suffer the same way. It means none of us suffer alone. The details differ, but the pain underneath is not unique. And this matters. Because the feeling of being alone in suffering is one of the biggest causes of chronic stress. It creates shame. It creates panic. It creates the desperate need to hide what hurts. But when that aloneness dissolves, so does the tension it brings. There's a reason why some of the deepest healing happens in silence, in the presence of someone who simply sits with another's pain, not to fix it, not to explain it, but to confirm it. That's what the mustard seed story does. It confirms the universality of grief. It turns stress from a personal punishment into a shared passage. And that alone changes everything. Letting go of personal suffering doesn't mean denying it. It means holding it differently. Not as a secret, not as a burden, but as something held with millions of others across time. This view is humbling, and it's liberating, because when the self is no longer the center of the storm begins to lose its force. The center starts to feel steadier, more grounded, more willing to breathe through what once felt unbearable. When the woman in the story finally returns to the Buddha, she doesn't come back the same. Her son is still gone. Her grief is still real. But she walks with a kind of quiet that wasn't there before. A kind of knowing that's deeper than belief. The task didn't give her what she wanted. It gave her what she needed. And what she needed wasn't a miracle. It was the simple, profound truth that she wasn't alone. Stress often asks to be understood, not erased. It asks to be felt in a way that's honest, not forced. It doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. And presence deepens when it's shared. When the stories of others are allowed to echo inside your own, the volume of your suffering doesn't get louder. It gets less sharp, less cutting, more held. That's the invitation this parable gives. Not to avoid grief, but to let it open the door to something bigger than the self, something wider than the story, something stronger than despair. Because when pain is felt within the context of shared humanity, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a path, a practice, a reminder. There is no household untouched by loss, no person untouched by stress. And knowing this not only breaks the illusion of isolation, it creates a field of compassion. Compassion not just for others, but for the self, because the self, too, is part of this universal pattern, part of this great wave of living, feeling, losing, healing. That's why the Buddha didn't remove the mother's grief. He redirected it. He pointed it toward the truth. And that truth, while simple, is one of the most powerful antidotes to stress the world has ever known. You are not alone. You have never been alone. And your pain, no matter how deep, is part of a much larger story, a human story. And when pain becomes part of that story, it no longer defines you, it includes you. And that inclusion, that sense of belonging to the messiness and beauty of life, might just be what healing actually looks like. Grief becomes lighter when it is seen as part of something larger. But even after realizing that suffering is shared, many still struggle with the next layer, the way pain lingers in attachment. Not just attachment to people, but to expectations, to how life should unfold, to the things that felt certain. Even after understanding that suffering is not unique, the mind still holds on. It tightens around what it loves, what it fears, what it hopes will stay the same. This is where stress hides in plain sight, not in the pain itself, but in the grip, the refusal to let life move as it does. And yet, there's a tension here, because letting go is often misunderstood. In the attempt to escape the burn of disappointment, many people mistake detachment for freedom. They pull back, they shut down, they convince themselves that if they don't feel deeply, they won't suffer deeply. But this isn't liberation, it's a kind of quiet suffocation. Buddhist practice doesn't call for coldness, it calls for clarity. It doesn't teach us to disconnect from life, it teaches us to meet life fully without clinging to it. This distinction between detachment and non-attachment is one of the most subtle and misunderstood parts of the path. Detachment numbs. Non-attachment opens. Detachment closes the heart to avoid pain. Non-attachment softens the heart to hold whatever pain may come without being owned by it. One shrinks your capacity to feel, the other expands it. When someone becomes detached, they stop feeling the highs and lows. They stop taking risks. They stop showing up fully. It may look like peace from the outside, but inside it is often hollow. There is no real connection. There is just distance, a kind of emotional exile disguised as strength. But Buddhism teaches that real freedom is not found in distance. It's found in presence without possession. To live non-attached means to be fully in your life while knowing nothing in it can be held forever. It means to love without gripping, to care without controlling, to experience without expecting permanence. This kind of living doesn't make you less involved, it makes you more awake. Because when you stop trying to bend life to your will, you begin to notice it more clearly. You listen more deeply. You appreciate more fully. You become intimate with the moment, not because you own it, but because you no longer need to. This kind of openness is not weakness. It requires a kind of courage that detachment can never reach. To let life move through you without closing off takes strength, because it means allowing joy without fearing its end. It means letting grief touch you without dragging you under. It means holding sorrow with tenderness and holding beauty without demand. That balance is not cold or distant. It is alive and alert. Stress thrives in attachment. The moment the mind says, "This must stay," or "That must never happen," it tightens, it contracts, it fights against change, and that fight generates friction. The deeper the attachment, the greater the fear of loss, and that fear breeds anxiety, tension, confusion. Non-attachment doesn't kill desire. It dissolves the need to be defined by desire's outcomes. It allows you to want something without losing yourself in it, to give everything without becoming devastated if it changes. In this way, non-attachment is not about avoiding intimacy. It's about transforming how intimacy operates. It turns relationships into spaces of freedom rather than chains of dependency. It allows connection to bloom without the pressure to last. It sees love not as possession, but as presence. A love that allows rather than demands, that flows rather than grips. People often think non-attachment means apathy. That's not the case. Apathy is the absence of care. Non-attachment is care without desperation. It's what allows you to walk beside others without trying to carry their path, to help without needing credit, to serve without needing recognition, to support others without needing them to act in a certain way. This is where real compassion lives, in the ability to hold space without trying to shape the outcome. Even with goals, this teaching applies. Non-attachment doesn't mean having no goals. It means not tying your self-worth to whether they succeed. It means doing your best while staying free from the need for results. This is what keeps stress from turning discipline into obsession, what keeps ambition from becoming addiction. When effort is made without clinging to reward, the mind stays calm, the heart stays open, the path stays steady. In meditation, this shows up as the ability to sit with whatever arises, without chasing or rejecting. Thoughts, emotions, memories, sensations. Each comes and goes. Non-attachment watches them without building a story. It doesn't freeze, it flows. And this ability to allow experience without needing to hold it becomes a training ground for how to meet the rest of life. When you begin to live this way, the nervous system slowly changes. It becomes less reactive. The spikes of stress that once came with every unmet expectation begin to fade. There is still effort, still emotion, still connection, but there is less collapse when things shift, because you start to see that every wave rises and falls, every moment appears and disappears, and nothing is truly yours to hold. This does not mean you love less. It means you love without fear. Fearless love is not reckless, it's rooted. Rooted in the understanding that everything you touch is temporary, but the way you touch it can be eternal. That the care you give matters, even if what you care for changes or ends. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of letting go, not giving up, but releasing the illusion that you can control what unfolds. In practice, this means noticing when the mind begins to cling, when it says, "I need this to go my way." When it starts building pressure around outcomes. That moment is an invitation, not to shut down, but to soften, to breathe, to step back and remember the deeper truth, that life is movement, and you don't need to grip the river to float with it. This awareness also brings resilience, because when you stop depending on things staying the same, you stop being thrown when they change. You begin to trust that peace isn't found in circumstances, it's found in relationship to them. A non-attached mind can hold chaos without becoming chaotic. It can meet sorrow without drowning. It can show up for life without needing life to bow to its preferences. This isn't easy, but it's possible, and it becomes easier with practice, not dramatic effort, but gentle, daily seeing, noticing where the mind attaches, noticing how the body tightens when it fears loss, and gently, patiently relaxing the grip, again and again, until, slowly, the grip isn't needed anymore. That's when space opens. Not the space of emptiness, but of freedom. The freedom to feel without falling apart, to engage without becoming entangled, to live without being pulled by the strings of every emotion, desire, or fear. This is what makes the teachings of non-attachment so profound. They don't take you away from life. They bring you deeper into it, cleaner, freer, more capable of meeting what's real. In the end, non-attachment isn't about what you avoid. It's about how you relate. It's the difference between holding something tightly with trembling hands and holding it gently with an open palm. One brings stress, the other brings strength, because the one who can let go is the one who cannot be shaken. The practice isn't about cutting ties. It's about cutting the illusion that you need ties to be whole, that you need conditions to be happy, that you need control to feel safe. Once those illusions begin to fade, what's left is a kind of quiet power, a stillness that stays even when the world moves. Stress often comes from gripping too hard to what isn't meant to be permanent. Non-attachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring in a way that honors the truth of change. It means you give yourself completely to this moment without needing it to last, without needing it to prove anything, without needing it to be different than it is. This kind of presence becomes the ground where peace grows. Not the kind of peace that avoids life, but the kind that walks through it unafraid. That holds joy with softness. That holds sorrow with grace. That lets each moment come and go, leaving the heart more open than before. And this is where the teachings begin to settle, not in theory, but in lived experience. In how you breathe when plans fall apart. In how you speak when things don't go your way. In how you love when you know nothing can stay forever. That's not detachment. That's the freedom of non-attachment. And it's a freedom no one can take from you. After learning how to let go without shutting down, after understanding that freedom doesn't come from pushing life away, but from holding it gently, something unexpected happens. The mind grows quieter. The heart grows steadier. The need to explain, control, or solve begins to fade. And in the space where constant reaction used to live, silence starts to rise. Not the kind of silence that fills awkward pauses or hides discomfort, but something much deeper. A silence that feels like it knows something. A silence that listens more than it speaks. A silence that says everything without needing a single word. Buddhism has always honored this kind of silence. The Buddha didn't answer every question he was asked. Sometimes he responded with complete stillness. Not out of avoidance, but out of precision. Because he knew not all questions needed answers. Some needed clarity. Some needed presence. And some needed to dissolve in the silence they came from. This kind of teaching doesn't appeal to a restless mind. It doesn't satisfy the craving for instant resolution, but it does something even more powerful. It removes noise. It clears space. It opens a doorway to direct understanding. When the Buddha remained silent in response to certain questions, it wasn't because he had nothing to say. It was because the nature of the question was built on confusion. Answering would only reinforce the misunderstanding. Silence, in that context, became a mirror. It reflected the limits of thought. It allowed the seeker to sit with the question itself, not to find an answer, but to see where the question came from. This is not passive. This is not avoidance. This is deep, active presence. And it requires more wisdom than most people are taught to recognize. Mental stress often hides behind the belief that everything needs a solution, that every doubt must be cleared, every plan must be perfected, every future scenario accounted for. This mental noise grows louder with each attempt to resolve uncertainty through thinking alone. But the mind was not designed to think its way into peace. Sometimes it must be quieted into clarity, not through force, but through stillness, through silence. Silence doesn't mean the absence of sound. It means the absence of noise that doesn't serve. It means stepping out of the mental chatter that loops without progress, the stories that repeat without change, the inner critic that never runs out of things to say. True silence is not empty. It's full of awareness. And in that awareness, stress begins to melt. Not because something was added, but because what wasn't needed was finally removed. In Buddhist monasteries, silence is not just a practice, it's a way of life. Entire days, sometimes weeks, are spent without words. Not to punish speech, but to elevate presence. Because every time words are withheld, attention deepens. Every time the mouth is closed, the ears open. And what is heard is not just the world around you, It's the world inside. The subtle shifts of breath, the tension in the jaw, the sensations in the chest, the quiet pulsing of thoughts as they rise and fall. Silence brings you into contact with what's always been there, but rarely noticed. In modern life, noise is constant. Not just external noise from devices, traffic, conversation, but internal noise from expectations, judgments, timelines, regrets. Most people live surrounded by sound and flooded with thought. Silence feels foreign, even uncomfortable. But discomfort is not a reason to run. It's a signal. It means silence is touching something unprocessed. And if you can stay with it long enough, that discomfort starts to change. It reveals what's underneath. And more often than not, what's underneath is not fear, but tiredness. A kind of spiritual exhaustion from carrying too much, too fast, for too long. Silence becomes medicine when it's met with patience. It begins to settle the nervous system. Breath lengthens, shoulders drop. The body begins to release the subtle contractions it's been holding. This isn't a technique, it's a return to what the body and mind have always known but forgotten: how to rest. Not in distraction, not in escape, but in presence. When people speak of peace, they often refer to circumstances. But real peace is not a place, it's a frequency. And silence tunes the body and mind back into that frequency. You don't need to add anything. You don't need to achieve anything. You simply need to stop feeding the noise that drowns it out. The Buddha's silence wasn't just personal. It was powerful. When he chose not to answer metaphysical questions about the beginning of time, the nature of the soul, the mechanics of the universe, it wasn't because he lacked insight. It was because he knew those questions would pull people away from what mattered, away from what's here, away from direct experience, and toward endless speculation. Stress often grows from the same habit, reaching for answers to things that don't need solving, just witnessing. Sometimes the deepest wisdom comes not from what we find, but from what we stop chasing. In meditation, silence takes on another role. It becomes the foundation. Without silence, meditation becomes mental activity. With silence, it becomes observation, a clear seeing of thoughts as they come and go, not pushing them away, not trying to stop them, just watching, noticing, letting each thought rise like a bubble in still water and disappear just the same. This is how silence reveals the true nature of the mind, not as something to battle, but as something to understand. This kind of understanding doesn't come in words. It comes in space, space between thoughts, space between breaths, space between reaction and response. And in that space, the roots of stress begin to loosen. Because stress needs tightness, it needs pressure, it needs speed. Silence disrupts all of those. It slows things down. It breaks patterns. It opens. Many people avoid silence because they associate it with emptiness. But the silence the Buddha pointed to is not empty. It's awake. It's vivid. It holds everything without judgment. And in that holding, transformation happens. Not because silence fixes anything, but because it allows what's already wise inside of you to rise to the surface. Even in daily life, silence can be integrated. A pause before responding, a breath before deciding, a moment of stillness before rushing to fix, react, Explain. These micro moments of silence have power. They interrupt the automatic. They create space for clarity. They remind you that not every situation needs your opinion, your solution, your reaction. Some things just need your presence. In relationships, silence can be a gift, not as withdrawal, but as depth. Sometimes the most healing moments between people are wordless. A shared breath, a quiet look, a hand held. The absence of speech can say more than words ever could. It can carry empathy, respect, and understanding that language sometimes distorts. Silence also teaches humility. It reveals how much we speak to control, to prove, to protect our sense of self. And when we stop speaking, we start to see. We see how often words are used to avoid vulnerability, to hide uncertainty, to cover fear. But when those words fall away, what's left is something far more honest. And that honesty is what dissolves the grip of stress, not by changing life, but by allowing you to meet life with your whole being. The Buddha's silence was never passive. It was active stillness. It was a form of teaching that required no explanation, because some truths are not taught, they are felt, they are known in the bones, and they arise naturally when the mind is quiet enough to receive them. Stress thrives on speed, it feeds on noise, it multiplies in complexity. Silence is the antidote to all three, not because it erases the world, but because it helps you re-enter the world with different eyes, calmer eyes, softer breath, a quieter heart. This is not escape, it's contact. Contact with reality, unfiltered and unforced. When silence is practiced intentionally, it rewires the system. It teaches the body that stillness is safe, that rest is allowed, that nothing needs to be done right now. This resets more than the mind. It resets identity. Because without constant talking, reacting, and planning, the question arises, who am I without my thoughts, without my roles, without my stories? That question is not something to answer. It's something to sit with. And silence is the only space vast enough to hold it, to hold you, not to shrink you, but to reveal what's always been here beneath the noise: awareness, presence, ease. This is why the Buddha answered so many loud questions with quiet stillness, because some answers live beyond language. Some truths are too simple to be spoken, and some peace can only be found when the last word has been said and the next one never comes. So now, as the world continues its noise, the invitation is not to run from it, but to find the silence underneath it, to pause long enough to hear the deeper rhythm, the one that was always there, waiting, steady, silent, free. Silence teaches the mind to stop grasping for answers it doesn't need. But when the noise fades, another layer often appears, one that's been running in the background all along. Patterns, the same thoughts that circle back in slightly different words, the same emotions that keep resurfacing no matter how often they're processed, the same stories that seem to rewrite themselves endlessly. And even in stillness, this repetition begins to feel heavy, not loud, but constant, not sharp, but draining. There's a name for this exhaustion in Buddhism. It's called samsara fatigue. Samsara isn't just about external rebirth. It's the cycle of mental becoming, the repeated spinning of identity, desire, fear, and the belief that the next moment will finally make things right. It's the treadmill of almost there, the loop of striving, reaching, planning, regretting. The entire machinery of thought that says peace is just one step away, as long as this one thing changes. And then the next, and then another. This is not just theory, this is daily life. The plan to start fresh on Monday, the next project that will finally prove your worth, the next relationship that will finally make you feel whole, the next version of yourself that won't struggle anymore. These are not just hopes. They are subtle contracts the mind makes with the future, promises that things will get better as long as the current discomfort is endured just a little longer. But that promise keeps breaking, and every time it does, the mind doesn't give up. It resets the loop. The fatigue that follows isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. It's the exhaustion of becoming, of trying to fix a self that keeps rebuilding itself through the very effort to be fixed. Samsara doesn't feel like a disaster. It feels like daily stress, like boredom that can't be shaken, like waking up with the weight of the same thoughts pressing down on your chest. And the reason it never ends is because it doesn't live in events. It lives in how the mind relates to events, how it believes that somewhere just ahead is a version of reality where nothing hurts. The Buddha taught that samsara is built on craving, not just for pleasure, but for becoming. The craving to be something more, or something different, or something better. And this craving doesn't just aim at goals, it defines identity. It whispers that you're only as worthy as your next improvement, your next achievement, your next escape from who you currently are. This belief keeps stress alive even in moments of success, because even when the goal is reached, the mind is already reaching again. The satisfaction fades, the next thing appears, and the chase continues. This isn't motivation, it's bondage. It's the cycle of not enoughness, and it never ends on its own. It breaks only when it's seen clearly, when the mechanism is revealed, when the mind stops asking, "What's next?" and starts asking, "What is this?" The cycle is subtle. It can look like productivity. It can sound like ambition. It can even feel like growth. But underneath it, there's a refusal to be still, a quiet resistance to what already is. Because if things are accepted as they are, the story of becoming loses its fuel. And without that story, the ego has nothing to chase. But that's exactly where freedom begins. Breaking the cycle doesn't mean giving up on goals. It means letting go of the identity that depends on achieving them. It means acting without believing that action will fix who you are. It means recognizing that stress doesn't come from failure. It comes from tying your peace to success. Samsara fatigue is what builds when life is lived like a problem that must constantly be solved. And the solution is not one more breakthrough. It's stepping off the wheel. The wheel turns because the mind clings to ideas, to roles, to outcomes, and each revolution deepens the groove. A familiar tension returns, the breath shortens, the nervous system braces. Even rest doesn't feel restful, because rest, too, is measured, graded by how productive it makes you when it ends. This is the saturation point, where nothing feels fulfilling because everything is measured against a future that never arrives. The key isn't to work harder. It's to stop believing that effort will complete you, that there's a finish line where you'll finally be safe from doubt, insecurity, or loss. that if you just heal a little more, fix a few more habits, polish a few more edges, the loop will stop spinning. This belief keeps people trapped in self-improvement that never ends. And what's more important than becoming better is learning how to be here without needing to be someone else. The Buddha's path isn't about becoming more. It's about seeing through the idea that you need to become anything at all. It's about resting in the awareness that was never lacking, never broken, never waiting for permission to be whole. This awareness doesn't spin. It watches. It doesn't crave. It allows. And in that shift from doing to seeing, the cycle begins to weaken. Meditation reveals this truth, not by giving you peace, but by showing you the engine that keeps stealing it. You sit, thoughts come, you chase them, you bring attention back, over and over, and slowly the pattern is revealed, not just in meditation, but everywhere, in how you relate, in how you plan, in how you wait for the future to feel better than the present. But the future is always this moment, postponed, and the present is always available if you stop running from it. This is where the deeper fatigue comes from, not the effort itself, but the resistance to stillness. The refusal to rest in the now because the mind says something better is coming. The most dangerous lie samsara tells is just one more success, one more answer, one more day of trying before you can relax. But just one more becomes the story of an entire life, a story where presence is always sacrificed for progress. The escape from this isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It's a moment of pause when the thought arises, "I'll feel better once," and you stop believing it. You let that thought pass without building a plan around it. You see it not as a command, but as a habit that has never kept its promise. And with that seeing, something loosens. Life still moves. You still work, you still grow, but not from the desperate need to become, from the quiet joy of being, from the clarity that nothing you do will make you more complete, and nothing you fail to do will make you less. This is not stagnation, it's stability, and from that stability, action becomes clean, without tension, without noise. Samsara fatigue fades when you stop bargaining with the future, when you stop using the next achievement to justify your worth, when you stop needing life to fulfill a version of yourself that was never solid to begin with. What's left isn't emptiness, it's relief. It's the breath that no longer tightens, the step that no longer rushes, the mind that no longer spins. This doesn't mean you never feel desire. It means desire stops owning you. It stops disguising itself as meaning. It becomes just a wave in awareness, not a command you have to obey. And in that space, you can finally feel what's underneath all the striving. Not a lack, but a quiet fullness that was never dependent on getting somewhere else. This fullness isn't flashy. It doesn't need to be impressive. It doesn't need to be explained. It's just here, breathing with you, sitting with you, waiting for you to notice that the cycle was optional all along. And when you do, everything softens, not because you achieved what you wanted, but because you stopped needing to become anything more than this. When the endless cycle of becoming finally starts to slow, something deeper comes into focus. Underneath all the striving, beneath the chasing and fixing and reaching, There is something else, something that has been quietly pulling the strings. The constant feeling of pressure doesn't come from the outside world alone. It comes from the weight of holding on to a self that must always prove its worth. A self that must always stay consistent, successful, in control, impressive, healing, evolving. A self that always feels slightly unfinished. This is where the heaviest burden lives, not in what we carry, but in who we think we have to be. And in Buddhist teachings, this illusion of a fixed identity is called the self, not the body, not the thoughts, not the personality, but the ongoing mental construct that says, I am this, or I must become that. The Buddha pointed to this concept and called it empty, not meaningless, not unreal, but not solid either. It changes constantly. It shifts depending on mood, memory, moment. And yet we treat it like it's the center of everything. Every fear, every stress, every comparison or insecurity points back to this unstable center we call me. This belief in a separate, permanent self is one of the most deeply conditioned habits in the human experience. It's not something we chose. It's something we inherited. From language, from culture, from story. From every moment someone said, you are this, or you should be that. Slowly, a picture is painted. A portrait of self that feels necessary to survive. And so, it's protected, defended, upgraded, but never truly questioned. Stress often hides inside this maintenance. The energy it takes to keep this self-image intact is constant. You are not just living life, you are constantly managing your role within it. Am I being seen correctly? Am I being respected enough? Do they like me? Am I doing enough? This pressure doesn't come from the world itself. It comes from the need to uphold a version of self that is never quite satisfied. The Buddhist teaching of anatta, non-self, doesn't mean there's nothing here. It means that what's here is not what we think. It's not fixed, not isolated, not separate. The I that you defend so fiercely is a process, not a thing. A movement of thought, a habitual perspective. And when that perspective loosens, so does the stress it carries. Not because the problems disappear, but because the one who was holding them so tightly no longer feels so solid. Much of the tension in daily life comes from trying to control how others perceive this self, trying to avoid embarrassment, trying to secure admiration, trying to prevent rejection. These are not light efforts. They are full-body experiences. They affect posture, breath, voice, sleep. The nervous system does not know the difference between physical danger and ego threat, and so it reacts the same way, tight, tense, alert. Letting go of a fixed self isn't about disappearing, it's about relaxing the grip. Seeing that the identity you've been protecting is not as stable as it pretends to be, that it changes based on who you're with, what you've achieved, how your day is going, that it has no true center. And that's not a problem, it's a relief. Because if the self is not solid, you don't have to carry it so carefully. You don't have to defend it at every turn. You don't have to make every mistake mean something about who you are. Most of the pain in thought comes from identification, the belief that I am my thoughts or I am my emotions. But thoughts and emotions pass like weather. They arise, they move, they dissolve. They don't stick unless you hold them, and they are not you. You are the awareness that sees them, and that awareness doesn't need to be protected. It doesn't need to be approved of. It doesn't even need a name. When the mind clings to identity, it creates a narrow lens. Everything is filtered through how it affects the self. If someone criticizes you, the story becomes, "They're attacking me." If you fail, the story becomes, "I am a failure." But without that fixed lens, those same moments shift. Criticism becomes feedback, failure becomes experience, and the emotional weight attached to every event begins to lift. This shift doesn't mean apathy, it means freedom. Freedom from self-obsession, freedom from performance, freedom from needing to be more than what you already are. And this freedom doesn't shrink your ability to engage with life, it enhances it. Because when you are no longer trapped inside the story of me, you are free to show up fully for others, for the moment, for the actual experience that's happening now. In relationships, this shift is powerful. Without clinging to a fixed identity, you no longer need to win every argument to protect your ego. You no longer need to pretend you're always right. You no longer feel personally attacked by someone else's emotions. And this makes space for real connection, for empathy, for softness. Not because you've become passive, but because you're no longer guarding a fragile self that needs constant defense. Even in success, the need for identity creates stress. You become attached to being seen a certain way, as competent, as enlightened, as powerful, and so every day becomes a performance to maintain that image. But if success doesn't define you, then failure can't destroy you. And in that space, your actions become cleaner, less reactive, less compulsive, more rooted in presence than in protection. The mind resists this teaching because identity feels necessary. It wants to know who it is. It wants to feel important. But importance is not the same as presence. You don't need to be important to be real. You don't need to be somebody to be whole. In fact, the more you try to be someone, the more stress you create. Because you are now responsible for maintaining that someone moment after moment in front of others, in front of yourself. This illusion of a solid self also fuels comparison. If you are a fixed thing, then others are threats. Their success reflects on your failure. Their beauty makes you feel invisible. Their peace makes you feel behind. But without the lens of me versus them, comparison dissolves. What remains is curiosity, connection, kindness. Not because you are trying to be a better person, but because the person who needs to prove something no longer feels real. Meditation exposes this directly. When you sit and watch the mind, you begin to notice that the sense of self rises and falls with thought. One moment you are confident, the next you are insecure. One moment you are a teacher, the next you are a student. The I that seems so solid begins to look more like a costume, something worn for context, not something real underneath. This is not philosophy, it's liberation. Because the self you've been trying to fix, improve, and validate for your whole life was never as fixed as you thought. And when the project of maintaining that identity begins to fall away, what replaces it is not confusion. It's peace. A peace that doesn't depend on being seen a certain way. A peace that isn't threatened by change. a peace that doesn't collapse when plans fail or roles shift. Stress depends on identity. Remove the weight of having to be a certain kind of person, and stress loses its fuel. You can still act, you can still care, but you don't need the action to prove something. You don't need the care to be validated. You are no longer using life to confirm a story. You are letting life be what it is, and letting yourself be who you are, even if that changes moment to moment. This teaching doesn't require you to drop everything you are. It invites you to hold it all more lightly, to see the roles, the traits, the history, not as lies, but as labels. Useful sometimes, limiting often, but never the full truth. And the more lightly you hold them, the more space there is for presence. Not performance, not perfection, just presence. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears it. And that awareness is not stressed. It's not confused. It's not striving to be anything. It's just here, watching, breathing, being. And that, the Buddha taught, is more than enough. The moment the pressure of identity begins to lift, something unexpected is often revealed. Beneath the stress of trying to be someone, beneath the comparisons and the ego tension, there is still a quiet pulse, a reaching, a wanting, a movement towards something more. This is desire. Not the loud kind that shouts for attention, but the subtle pull toward experience, toward beauty, toward meaning. It doesn't vanish when the self-concept dissolves. It becomes clearer. And this raises a deeper question. If desire isn't the problem, then why does it so often lead to suffering? The Buddha never said desire itself was the cause of suffering. What he pointed to was craving, tanha, the tight, grasping energy that tries to possess what it desires. This distinction matters because desire can be a movement of life. Craving, on the other hand, is resistance to change. It's the refusal to let go of a moment once it's tasted. The belief that unless this desire is fulfilled, something is missing. Craving is not wanting, craving is needing, and it is this need that burns. Stress often arises not because a desire exists, but because it has turned into a demand. What was once a soft pull becomes a clenched fist. The mind begins to believe that peace depends on having this one thing, on making this one outcome happen, and the body responds accordingly. Tension builds, anxiety spikes, energy narrows. Everything is filtered through the lens of acquisition. The desire is no longer something to enjoy, it's something to survive. Buddhism teaches that craving is the spark that lights the fire of suffering. But trying to kill all desire is not the answer. That approach creates its own kind of violence. It leads to suppression, denial, spiritual bypass. The point is not to destroy the snake of desire, but to burn the rope that binds you to it. That rope is craving. That rope is clinging. That rope is the belief that your happiness depends on things staying exactly as you want them. When craving is present, even pleasure becomes exhausting, because the mind cannot rest in the moment. It is always chasing, always calculating. How long will this last? Can I keep it? What if it's taken away? The sweetness of life becomes sour in the grip of attachment. And this is where suffering grows, not in desire, but in refusal to let go. Letting go is not rejection. It's not apathy. It's a shift in relationship. You can want something without needing it to define you. You can reach towards something without losing yourself in the reaching. This is the subtle art, to live with open hands instead of closed fists, to feel the beauty of longing without the burden of possession. Desire, when held lightly, expands the heart. It connects you to creativity, to movement, to intimacy. But the moment it turns into clinging, it becomes stress. Because clinging cannot tolerate uncertainty. It cannot handle change. And change is the nature of everything. So clinging is always at war with reality. It builds hope that shatters when the moment shifts. It sets up conditions for happiness that reality can't promise. Freedom does not mean becoming empty of desire. It means becoming free of the illusion that your peace depends on desire's fulfillment. When that illusion breaks, the craving dissolves, and what's left is something clean, a pure wanting without fear, a movement of life that doesn't require anything in return. This clarity also affects how choices are made. Craving makes decisions heavy. It loads every outcome with emotional weight. It whispers that there is one right path, and if you don't find it, you will suffer. But when craving ends, decision-making becomes lighter. You choose from curiosity, not compulsion. You act from intention, not fear. The stakes lower. The mind relaxes. This shift isn't just philosophical, it's biological. When craving is active, the nervous system tightens. The fight-flight-freeze response can be triggered even by simple desires, because the brain believes it needs the object of desire to survive. When craving ends, the body settles, the breath deepens, energy opens, and in that state, pleasure becomes accessible again, not as a goal, but as a byproduct of presence. Non-craving is not the absence of feeling. It's feeling without pressure, without inner bargaining, without the belief that happiness is always just one step away. It allows joy to be enjoyed and pain to be experienced without panic. Because when you are not caught in craving, every moment becomes more vivid, more bearable, even more meaningful. This is why the Buddha taught not just renunciation, but wise relationship. Renunciation is not rejection. It is freedom from addiction. You can be in the world, love the world, engage with the world, without being chained to it. The key is how tightly you hold what arises. When craving is absent, even grief can be clean. It can move through the body without resistance, without turning into despair. Craving distorts perception. It filters everything through the lens of, how can I get what I want? It blinds the mind to other possibilities, to other people, to the unfolding of life as it is. But when craving ends, perception clears. You see more. You feel more. You are no longer trapped inside the narrow tunnel of your own agenda. And this creates space, not just for peace, but for wisdom. Wisdom doesn't mean avoiding desire. It means knowing when desire is helpful and when it has turned into bondage. It means watching the shift from openness to neediness, from enjoyment to grasping, and having the presence to loosen that grip before it becomes a source of suffering. This doesn't require perfection. It requires attention, the ability to pause and check the quality of your desire. Is this coming from fullness or from fear? Is this desire expanding my presence or shrinking it? Am I being pulled by clarity or pushed by compulsion? These questions don't need immediate answers. They just need honesty. Honesty is the bridge. Because most craving hides behind noble language. It dresses up as purpose, growth, love. But deep down, it is still a contract with the future. It is still saying, "I'll only rest when this is mine." And that contract never delivers, because once one desire is met, another takes its place. Craving is never satisfied. It only changes shape. This is why peace is not found in the fulfillment of craving. It's found in the release of it. Not because desire is bad, but because freedom matters more. Because your nervous system was not designed to live in perpetual grasping. Because life was not meant to be a constant negotiation for comfort. It was meant to be lived, felt, allowed. When craving ends, you still want, you still love, you still create. But you don't cling. And that changes everything. It turns need into preference. It turns longing into inspiration. It turns pressure into peace. This is what it means to burn the rope, not the snake. To keep desire alive, but cut the thread that turns it into suffering. To feel fully without fear. To move forward without panic. To engage with the world without needing it to complete you. Because nothing outside of you can complete what was never missing. And the deeper truth, the one that craving hides, is that peace was never waiting at the end of desire. It was always here, beneath the grasping, beneath the wanting, quietly breathing, softly resting, already whole. When the grip of craving loosens, the breath deepens. The mind stops running from moment to moment in search of something more. But even in the quiet, another form of pressure often remains, less obvious, but just as heavy. It doesn't live in desire for things. It lives in thoughts about time, thoughts about what was, thoughts about what will be. This is the mental weight that comes not from experience itself, but from how experience is carried across past and future like a loop that never closes. The Buddha taught that much of human suffering comes not from life itself, but from the mind's fixation on time. Not clock time, but psychological time. The story of what has happened and what must happen next. The mind becomes a narrator, always reworking the past or rehearsing the future, and in doing so, it abandons the only place where life can be touched directly, the present. This abandonment is not just a loss of awareness, it's a kind of self-exile, and it is exhausting. Stress begins to rise when the mind cannot let go of what it believes should have been different. Regret, guilt, nostalgia, resentment. These are not just emotions, they are time-based identities. The mind clings to what once was, believing it defines what is now. And so, every attempt to rest is haunted by memory, by the replaying of choices, by the rewriting of scenes that no longer exist. On the other side, anxiety is born from the mind's projection into what has not yet come. Anticipation, fear, doubt, pressure, all rooted in future thinking. These thoughts create timelines the body cannot live in. They pull the nervous system forward into scenarios that have not happened. And even when they're imagined, the body responds as if they're real. The breath shortens, the shoulders lift, the heart tightens. The present becomes a blur behind the fog of anticipation. This is how time creates tension, not through its passing, but through the illusion that it must be managed. The belief that the past must be fixed and the future must be controlled. But the truth is, the past cannot be changed, and the future cannot be secured. Both exist only in thought, and the more thought tries to hold them, the heavier they become. Buddhism offers a radical invitation to see time not as something you move through, but as something the mind constructs. The past is memory. The future is imagination. Both are created by thought, and thought by its nature is fleeting, which means the only moment that can ever be truly known is this one. Not the one just before, not the one that might come next, just this. This insight is not a rejection of time as a tool. It's a release of time as an identity. The understanding that you are not your history, you are not your plans, you are not the sum total of what has happened or what you hope will happen. You are here, breathing, alive, and that is enough. Letting go of the past does not mean forgetting. It means no longer using memory as the blueprint for identity. The events happened. The consequences may still unfold, but the story about what it all means is optional. You are not the mistake. You are not the failure. You are not the praise. You are not the trauma. You are the awareness that sees it all, that feels it all, and that remains untouched by the story's grip. The same is true for the future. Planning is not the problem. Clinging is. The idea that your peace depends on everything unfolding perfectly is a recipe for stress, because nothing ever unfolds exactly as expected, and every moment spent trying to secure the future is a moment lost from living it. Letting go of the future means allowing space for uncertainty, not resisting it, not fearing it, but learning how to rest inside it. This shift does not make life passive. It makes life immediate, urgent in the best sense of the word. Because when time stops being a concept and becomes a direct experience, everything sharpens. The colors seem brighter, sounds are clearer, emotions are less filtered. The smallest gesture carries meaning, not because it points to a goal, but because it's no longer buried under thought. Meditation becomes a training ground for this presence, not by forcing the mind to stay still, but by noticing each time it wanders into time. Noticing the pull of memory, noticing the grasping toward later, and gently bringing the attention back. Not back to an ideal state, but back to what's here. The breath, the body, the sound in the room, the weight of the moment, just as it is. Over time, this practice begins to dissolve the illusion that life is somewhere else. It breaks the spell of, when this happens, I'll finally feel okay. Because you begin to see that the peace you've been seeking through time was only ever available outside of it. Time, when used unconsciously, turns every present moment into a means to an end. Life becomes a project to be optimized, a series of steps toward a better version of later. But later never arrives, and the one waiting for it grows tired. This is the fatigue of time, the soul's exhaustion from never being allowed to rest where it already is. Buddhism doesn't ask you to stop moving through life. It asks you to stop believing that life is elsewhere. It reminds you that the next breath will not complete you, that the next success will not fulfill you, that the next moment will not finally solve what this moment could not. It teaches that peace is not found in arrival. Peace is found in stopping the need to arrive. Even emotions change their tone in the absence of time. Sadness without story is just a wave. Fear without projection is just sensation. Joy without clinging is just a brightness in the chest. These states become less personal, less defining, because they are no longer tied to a timeline. They are just appearances in awareness, each rising and falling like wind moving through trees. This is why the present moment is not a technique. It's a return, a homecoming, not to something new, but to what's always been waiting beneath the surface of thought. And this return is not something you achieve, it's something you allow, by noticing, by pausing, by remembering that nothing you're trying to fix exists outside of right now. When you begin to live from presence, time doesn't disappear, but it stops defining you. You remember the past when needed. You plan the future when useful. But neither becomes your identity. You move with time, not through it. You act from now, not for later. You allow moments to unfold without turning them into proof of progress. This orientation changes everything. The smallest tasks become meaningful. A conversation becomes a full encounter. A walk becomes an experience instead of a step toward productivity. Because nothing is being measured, nothing is being compared. It's not about doing more, it's about being here while doing what you do. This is not always easy. The habit of time thinking is strong. The pull of memory and anticipation is wired deep into the nervous system. But every moment of presence loosens that wiring. Every time you come back to now, the weight of time grows a little lighter. And over time, the present moment starts to feel more like home. This home is not an escape. It's the only place you can live without stress. Not because life is perfect here, but because here you are not trying to escape. Here, you are not trying to prove. Here, you are not replaying or rehearsing. You are simply aware. And that awareness holds everything you thought you needed from time. Freedom from time doesn't mean becoming detached from life. It means engaging more directly, loving more fully, acting more clearly. Because you are no longer distracted by what was or what might be. You are here completely, and in that completeness, there is nothing left to chase. This is where stress ends. Not at the end of a journey, but in the surrender of the idea that the journey ever had to take you somewhere else. You are already where life is. And life is not in time. Life is now. When time no longer traps the mind in stories of before and after, something unfamiliar but powerful begins to surface. Without a future to chase or a past to relive, the raw sensations of this very moment grow louder, and among them, stress often appears, not as a mistake, but as what's been here all along, waiting without disguise, the pressure in the chest, the racing thoughts, the tightening of muscles. For most, the instinct is to fix it or flee. But in the absence of projection, there's a new opportunity. One the Buddhist path has pointed to for centuries. Stress itself can become the teacher. Monastics don't see stress as a failure of the mind. They see it as a message, not in metaphor, but in direct experience, something to be studied, held. observed without judgment. They don't turn away from agitation, they turn toward it. And in doing so, they uncover layers of truth that escape the ordinary eye. They aren't looking to get rid of discomfort. They are learning how it moves, where it hides, what it really is beneath the narrative. They treat stress not like an intruder, but like scripture, a sacred text written in the language of breath, heartbeat, and mental contraction. In monastic life, every part of the day is structured to reveal the patterns of mind. But it's not the schedule that does the work, it's the quality of attention. Whether chopping vegetables or walking slowly in silence, the monk learns to watch the mind's reactions, not from a distance, but from a place of quiet intimacy. Stress is not hidden under layers of distraction. There's no phone to scroll, no conversation to escape into, no endless list of tasks to keep attention away. And in that stillness, agitation rises clearly. At first, it feels like a problem, but over time, it's seen as a mirror. Stress, when not avoided, reveals conditioning. It shows how deeply the mind resists the present. It brings forward every assumption, every unmet desire, every mental habit formed over years. Monks are trained to welcome this process, to see it not as punishment, but purification, not as chaos, but clarity. Because what appears as agitation is often just the friction between reality and expectation. The mind wanted something else. Reality gave this. And in that gap, stress is born. To make stress an object of meditation means to stop fighting it, not to give up, but to observe, to place attention right where the discomfort lives, and to stay. This requires patience, but not force. It's not about endurance, it's about curiosity, a soft, steady presence that begins to recognize patterns, where stress shows up in the body, what thoughts accompany it, what behaviors follow. The monk is not trying to solve it, he is learning its language. This form of attention transforms the relationship. Stress becomes less of a storm and more of a map. It points to attachment, to clinging, to identification. It shows what the mind is still protecting, still grasping, still afraid to lose. And by seeing it clearly, those attachments begin to loosen, not because they're pushed away, but because they are no longer hidden. Monks often sit through long hours of discomfort. Legs ache, back tightens, thoughts scream, but they are not sitting to endure. They are sitting to learn. Every sensation becomes a field of practice. Every flicker of resistance becomes a question. What is this trying to teach me? Not why is this happening, but what can be known here that couldn't be known through comfort? This mindset is not just for monasteries. It can be brought into any life. Every moment of stress, every flash of anxiety or irritation can be met with the same kind of attention. What does this feel like in the body? Where does the breath go? What belief is being threatened? Is it the need to be right, the fear of being misunderstood, the craving for certainty? Every emotion carries its own thread. When followed, it leads inward, not to more confusion, but to the root. Stress often arises around identity, around the idea of how things should go, who we should be, how others should treat us. And when life doesn't match those ideas, tension builds. But when these assumptions are made visible through practice, they lose some of their grip. They are seen not as facts, but as conditioned patterns. The belief that I must always be strong, the belief that failure means something about my worth, the belief that comfort equals safety. These stories dissolve under the light of sustained attention. Some monasteries teach walking meditation for this reason, because movement brings up different layers of stress. The mind wants to move fast. The body is asked to slow down. In that conflict, more patterns emerge. Impatience, boredom, doubt, and each one becomes the next object of practice. The point is never perfection. It is familiarity. To know stress so well that it no longer controls from the shadows. When monks feel the rising of stress, they often note it mentally. Tension, 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 until it changes. Not to control it, not to analyze it, just to recognize it. This simple naming interrupts the spiral of reactivity. It brings the mind into direct contact with the present. And in that contact, the sensation shifts, not always in intensity, but in meaning. It is no longer a threat. It is a visitor. The same practice can be used in daily life, noticing when the stomach tightens, when the jaw clenches, when the shoulders lift, and instead of escaping, turning toward those sensations, naming them, feeling them fully, watching the stories that attach to them without believing those stories. This kind of attention turns the world into a meditation hall. Every traffic jam, every tense meeting, every awkward silence becomes part of the curriculum. Monks don't seek stress, but they don't fear it. Because they've learned that stress, when seen clearly, is a gateway. It breaks the illusion of control. It reveals the fragility of the ego. It brings humility, and in that humility, wisdom grows. Not as an idea, but as a way of being. A way that no longer reacts automatically, no longer fights what is already happening. This approach is not passive. It's deeply engaged, but it's engaged from stillness, not from reactivity. It's action rooted in clarity. Speech born from understanding, movement grounded in presence. This is what it means to let stress teach you, not to submit, but to listen. To let the discomfort guide you back to yourself, back to the body, back to the breath. Even the most intense forms of stress carry insight. Physical pain reveals the limits of resistance. Emotional pain exposes the depth of attachment. Mental agitation shows the looping habits of thought. When met with compassion and curiosity, each one offers something different. Not to be fixed, but to be known. And that knowing changes how they land. They may still arise, but they no longer rule. Monastics speak of liberation, not as the absence of difficulty, but as freedom from bondage to difficulty. The mind may still experience stress, but it doesn't tighten around it. It doesn't build a story, an identity, a prediction. It experiences the wave, then returns to calm. And over time, this becomes the habit. Not panic, but presence. This is not exclusive to monks. Anyone can learn to turn toward stress with awareness. It doesn't require robes or rituals. It requires willingness, a willingness to feel without flinching, to stay without solving, to see without judging. This is the essence of the path, to make the mind so steady that even its storms become part of its peace. So the next time stress rises, pause. Feel it. Don't push it away. Don't explain it. Let it speak in its own language. Let it show you what you're clinging to. Let it reveal the places in yourself that still believe peace must come from control. And as you watch, you may notice something you've never seen before. Not just the stress, but the space around it. The awareness that's never been stressed. The clarity that's always been here, underneath it all. Waiting to be noticed. Ready to teach. When stress is no longer treated like a problem to escape, but a guide to observe, a deeper truth begins to surface. The tension isn't always about fear, pain, or urgency. Often, it lives in something quieter, something most don't notice until they feel its constant grip. The need to be right, the need to know, the need to win arguments, to defend opinions, to walk away feeling validated, certain, superior. These patterns don't just create conflict between people, they create internal pressure that rarely rests. And this need to always have the answers might be one of the most invisible causes of stress in daily life. In Buddhist tradition, wisdom is not measured by how much you know, it's measured by how empty you can become. Not empty of insight, but empty of certainty. This is what is known as the empty cup. A mind that is not full of fixed beliefs, assumptions, or pride, but open, willing to be poured into. A mind that sees learning not as acquisition, but as relationship. A mind that understands the tighter the grip on needing to be right, the more tension builds in every part of life. The stress of being right begins in childhood. Praise is given for correct answers, for getting things done without mistakes, for knowing how the world works. Slowly, the mind begins to associate value with certainty, and over time, not knowing starts to feel like danger. Questions become uncomfortable, doubt becomes weakness, and being wrong feels like failure. But this fear of being wrong isn't about truth, it's about identity. The self gets wrapped up in correctness, and so being challenged feels personal. This is where arguments turn into war, not because of the topic, but because someone's sense of self is at stake. The body tenses, the voice sharpens, the mind prepares counter-arguments while the other person is still speaking, and none of it brings peace. Even when the point is won, the stress remains, because the victory was not for truth, it was for ego. Letting go of the need to be right doesn't mean giving up clarity. It means releasing the idea that your value depends on holding it. It means being willing to meet life as a student, not as a judge. The beginner's mind, central to many Buddhist teachings, invites this openness. It welcomes not knowing. It listens more than it speaks. It does not mistake information for wisdom. This mindset softens the nervous system, because when you no longer need to defend your position, the body no longer prepares for battle. Conversations become exchanges instead of competitions. Curiosity replaces control, and from that space, genuine learning becomes possible. Not just learning facts, but learning people, learning experience, learning the subtle art of being present without pretending. Most people don't realize how much energy is spent maintaining the image of being right. In relationships, in the workplace, even in silence. There's a constant editing of words, a constant fear of saying the wrong thing, of being exposed. This is not awareness. This is fear in disguise. And fear contracts everything. The empty cup mindset invites expansion. It invites the ability to say, "I don't know," and mean it with humility, not shame. It invites moments of silence in conversation, not as awkward gaps, but as space for thoughtfulness. It allows opinions to evolve. It allows beliefs to be updated. And in doing so, it creates room for growth that stress no longer interferes with. This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean letting go of discernment or clarity. It means the clarity is not rigid. It breathes. It changes with experience. Because the person you are today is not the same as you were 5 years ago. And yet, many people carry ideas as if they must never change. As if truth, once grasped, becomes a weapon instead of a window. The attachment to being right is often linked to fear of being wrong. But being wrong is not a problem, it's a moment of freedom. It shows where the light hasn't reached yet. It reveals where learning is still possible. And when it's met with humility, it becomes a gift rather than a threat. In meditation, the empty cup mindset shows up as dropping the narrative. Every time the mind returns to a story about who you are, what you believe, what should happen, you come back to breath. Not because the story is evil, but because it's not now. And each time you drop it, the cup empties just a little more, until awareness becomes less about what's known and more about what's being known in real time. This shift affects everything. It changes how you listen, no longer waiting for your turn to speak, no longer collecting points for later rebuttal, just listening with presence, with interest, with the understanding that every voice is an opportunity to see differently, not to adopt blindly, but to observe wisely. Stress melts when the inner scoreboard is turned off, when conversations are no longer battles to win, but dances to explore, when the need to impress is replaced by the joy of connection. This is not philosophy. It's a nervous system reset, a dropping of the constant readiness to defend, a release of the armor that's been mistaken for intelligence. Even the desire to teach can carry this tension, the need to be the one who knows, the one who guides. But the best teachers stay students. They speak from curiosity, not certainty. They ask more than they explain. They hold space for questions they can't answer, knowing the silence itself can be a teaching. This emptiness is not a void. It's spaciousness, the kind that allows experience to enter without being squeezed into old frameworks. It's what allows love to unfold without agenda, learning to deepen without pressure, dialogue to expand without conclusion, because the point is not to be right, it's to be real. And being real is the opposite of performing. It's the opposite of needing approval. It's the opposite of stress, because there's no longer a script to follow, no identity to protect, just presence, just breath, just what is true in this moment, even if that truth changes in the next. This mindset also builds trust. Others feel safer around someone who isn't always trying to prove themselves. The absence of defensiveness invites honesty. It creates a space where mistakes can be acknowledged without fear, where questions can be asked without judgment, where wisdom can grow without pressure. Letting go of the need to be right doesn't remove your insight. It removes your fear. And in that absence of fear, New dimensions of thought become available. Ideas that couldn't land before now have space. Understanding deepens, and the mind, once clenched, begins to breathe again. To hold an empty cup means to arrive at each moment unburdened by yesterday's conclusions. It means seeing the world without the filter of needing it to confirm what you already believe. It means walking into each day with openness rather than defense. And that shift doesn't just change how you think. It changes how you live. Because stress is not only caused by what happens, it's caused by how tightly you hold what you think should be happening. When the cup is full of assumptions, nothing new can be received. When the cup is emptied of pride, of fear, of needing to know, even the most ordinary moment becomes extraordinary. This is not a practice of losing knowledge. It's a practice of holding it lightly, of remembering that truth is not owned, it is touched, briefly, softly, and then let go, so that more can be received, so that the mind stays fresh, so that peace no longer depends on being seen as right, but simply on being fully present. This is the art of release, not from responsibility, but from rigidity. The shift from needing to control to learning how to relate. The end of intellectual tension, the end of performance, the beginning of ease. Not because everything is certain, but because certainty is no longer required. When the mind no longer clings to being right, when presence replaces performance, when thoughts are held with gentleness rather than force, something deeper starts to rise. A quiet question begins to form underneath all the letting go. What if even this release is being held too tightly? What if the effort to surrender is just another version of control? What if the pressure to let go is quietly becoming the new thing you can't let go of? This is one of the most subtle traps on the path. The idea that peace depends on mastering non-attachment, that happiness only arrives once everything uncomfortable has been successfully released. The effort itself becomes the new attachment. Letting go turns into a project, a task, a goal. But true release doesn't come when it's demanded. It comes when the need to control dissolves completely, even the need to control surrender itself. The mind wants to resolve discomfort by doing something. Even if the something is labeled spiritual, it wants to speed up grief, push through anxiety, skip past doubt. It treats release as another thing to achieve. But any effort to force emotional resolution tightens the very knot it's trying to untangle. The pressure to heal becomes stress in disguise. The desire to be free from desire becomes another craving, polished to look like progress. Buddhist teachings often speak to this paradox. That craving can wear many forms, even the craving for enlightenment, even the craving for stillness. The moment the mind says, "I should be past this," or "I must let this go now," it is already resisting what is. And resistance, even when dressed in spiritual language, is still resistance. Real letting go is not something you do. It is something that happens when you stop interfering, when you stop chasing peace as a prize, when you stop trying to speed up what needs to unfold in its own time. It is not a choice to release. It is the absence of the one who needs to release. This shift is not passive. It's not about giving up awareness. It's about releasing the belief that your discomfort means something is wrong. It's about allowing discomfort to live and pass in its own rhythm without you manipulating it. That kind of surrender is not weakness. It is the deepest strength, because it no longer depends on being in control of anything. In practice, this might look like sitting in meditation with a restless mind, not trying to force stillness, not trying to silence thoughts, but simply being there with them, letting them be what they are, watching the urge to push them away, not pushing the urge either, just noticing, breathing, allowing even the part of you that wants to escape to be part of the present. This includes everything, not just the peaceful parts. The mind often asks, "How do I let go?" as if there is a technique that guarantees results. But that question is already reaching, already assuming that this moment is insufficient, already rejecting what's here. Letting go doesn't begin with doing. It begins with honesty, with the courage to say, "This is still here, and I don't know how to release it yet." That honesty opens more space than any forced attempt to fix. This is why some of the deepest healing happens when people stop trying to heal, when they stop turning their pain into a project, when they stop believing they need to perform peace, and instead simply show up, raw, confused, human, without strategy, without effort. That rawness isn't failure, it's real presence. The trap of forced letting go can appear anywhere. In relationships where someone tries to move on before they've fully grieved. In meditation, where a person tries to stop thinking instead of understanding their thoughts. In forgiveness, where someone tries to say the words before their heart is ready. Each time, the effort becomes a new attachment, a new reason to feel like something is missing. But the missing feeling doesn't come from the pain itself. It comes from the belief that the pain shouldn't still be there, that it must be removed for life to continue. This is the weight, not the emotion, but the demand that it must be gone by now. Real release begins the moment that demand drops away. Release is not an act of will, it is an act of awareness. It is the moment you see your own reaching clearly without pushing it away. The moment you hold space for the part of you that still wants to control, not to make it vanish, but to let it exist without becoming it. To be the watcher, not the fixer. To be the space around the pain, not the struggle inside it. There is a difference between letting something go and letting it pass. Letting go often implies a decision. Letting something pass means you're no longer holding the gate. You're no longer trying to speed it up. You're simply watching as it comes and goes in its own time. This is a quieter kind of wisdom, one that doesn't make headlines, one that doesn't always feel like progress. But it's the kind that lasts. This kind of surrender doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like relief, like something you've been carrying quietly drops without warning, not because you figured it out, but because the part of you trying to figure it out got tired and finally rested. That rest is the doorway. Not a doing, but an undoing. The ego wants release to look impressive. It wants stories of triumph, moments of clarity, sudden transformation. But most real letting go is unremarkable. It happens in the background, in the small space between thoughts, in the moments when you stop trying, when you stop pretending to be somewhere other than here. Letting go of letting go is not giving up on change. It's giving up on forcing change, It's allowing transformation to come through contact, not control, through presence, not pressure, through awareness, not ambition. This also changes how you relate to others. When you stop trying to fix your own discomfort, you stop needing others to fix theirs. You stop trying to make people heal faster, understand quicker, respond better. You let them be in their own process, because you've made peace with your own, and this gives people space to breathe, to unfold, to trust. Even in spiritual communities, the pressure to appear evolved becomes a new form of stress. The polished image of someone who's always centered, always wise, always unshaken. But no one is above the waves. No one is beyond the reach of grief, fear, anger. The difference is how those waves are met, not with suppression, not with performance, but with quiet allowance. The heart opens, not when the pain is removed, but when it's no longer resisted, when it's allowed to be part of the moment, not because you want it, not because you're resigned to it, but because it's already here, and what's already here can only be healed by being seen, not silenced. This presence doesn't numb you, it wakes you up. Not into bliss, but into honesty. The kind of honesty that allows joy to return naturally, without force. The kind that makes space for beauty, even in sadness. Because when nothing is being pushed away, everything becomes part of the path. There is no formula for real release, no step-by-step method that guarantees liberation. Because the very idea of a method implies control. And release is the opposite. It is the moment the grip finally loosens. Often when you least expect it. Often after everything else has failed. So instead of trying to let go, try to be here. Try to feel fully. Try to breathe into what is. And when the urge to escape arises, meet that too. Not as an enemy, but as another wave, another ripple in the process of unfolding, another teacher in the long and subtle art of coming home. There is no perfect moment of surrender. There is only the next moment, and what it reveals when you're no longer trying to shape it. That's where freedom lives. Not in what you let go of, but in what you no longer need to manage. Not in getting rid of discomfort, but in finally making peace with the fact that discomfort too has a place in you. When the urge to force freedom dissolves, what remains is presence without resistance. The struggle to let go softens into a quiet willingness to stay. And in that stillness, something unexpected begins to unfold. The mind, once wild and scattered, starts to settle. Not because it was controlled, but because it was met with patience. This process, so subtle and personal, has been passed down for centuries in a rare sequence of Zen teachings known as the ox-herding pictures. These 10 images hold a silent map, not to dominate the mind, but to understand its nature, walk beside it, and gently guide it home. Each picture in this series is not just an image, but a reflection of a stage in spiritual life. They do not represent levels to conquer. They are not badges of progress. They are mirrors, quiet invitations to look inward and witness where the mind is in its relationship to truth. Sometimes the path is clear. Sometimes it circles back. But each part is essential, not because it is ideal, but because it is honest. There is no rushing through these phases. Each one reveals something about how the inner world responds to awareness. The journey begins in the wilderness of distraction. The first image shows a person searching for the ox, symbolizing the mind. This is where most begin, lost in thought, unaware of how often attention drifts. Life feels scattered, and peace is distant. There is an urge to seek, but the object of that seeking remains unclear. This stage is marked by confusion, but within the confusion is a vital turning point, the recognition that something is missing. This recognition is not weakness, it is the beginning of insight. As the journey continues, the second image reveals signs of the ox. A footprint, a subtle clue. This symbolizes those early glimpses of mindfulness when presence breaks through the fog of distraction. There may be a brief moment of stillness, a realization of how far the mind tends to wander. These fragments are easy to miss, but they are seeds. They show the mind is not broken, only undisciplined. With attention, the track becomes clearer. The third picture depicts the ox partially found. The mind begins to come into view, not fully understood, but no longer hidden. This stage often brings frustration. Awareness increases, but with it, so does the awareness of restlessness. Old habits still dominate, impulses still lead. But this is not failure, this is clarity. It's the first honest look at how deeply conditioned the mind has become. And it sets the ground for true practice, not as self-improvement, but as intimacy. In the fourth image, the ox is caught. The mind has been clearly seen, and for the first time, a real effort is made to tame it. This does not mean force, it means presence with discipline. Meditation deepens. Habits are met with compassion, but not indulged. The inner struggle becomes sharper, not because the mind is worse, but because it is no longer operating in the shadows. The ox resists, just as the mind resists stillness. But the one holding the rope, the practitioner, is learning how to stay. The fifth stage shows the ox being tamed. The struggle softens. The mind begins to respond to attention. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer drag the body into tension. There is less identification, less urgency. Emotions still come, but they are not clung to. This stage reveals that the mind can be trained, not through suppression, but through gentle persistence. Like the breath returning again and again. Each moment of returning is a moment of taming. In the sixth picture, the ox is at rest. The mind no longer needs to be pulled. It follows naturally. Awareness becomes steady, not because distractions are gone, but because the relationship to them has changed. There is trust, not perfection, but trust. A kind of inner companionship between the observer and the mind. This shift allows rest without avoidance, action without compulsion, stillness without fear. The seventh image shows the ox disappeared. Only the person remains. The mind and the observer are no longer separate. The distinction between practice and practitioner dissolves. There is just presence. This is not the end. It is a profound opening, a falling away of mental division. There is no longer someone doing meditation. There is just awareness, resting as itself. This is often quiet, often subtle, but it carries depth that cannot be mistaken. In the eighth image, even the self disappears. There is no person, no ox, just the circle, symbolizing emptiness, fullness, wholeness. This is where the language of separation falls away. Awareness is no longer aimed at anything. It simply is. There is no goal, no effort, no structure, nothing to be tamed, nothing to be sought. This is the absence of struggle, not because everything is resolved, but because resolution is no longer needed. But Zen does not end in emptiness. The ninth image shows a return to the world. A person walking back through the village, empty-handed, barefoot, smiling. Nothing is carried, nothing is performed. There is no need to teach, no need to impress, just quiet service. The mind has returned to life, not to dominate it, but to live within it with freedom. Every moment becomes sacred, not because it is separate from the world, but because it is one with it. The final picture is the simplest of all. A child playing beneath a flowering tree. No more symbols, no more searching, just ordinary life seen through eyes that no longer cling. This is not transcendence. This is total presence, where the mind has nothing to prove, nothing to fix, nothing to hold, just the ease of being, just the joy of breath, of movement, of existence itself. These 10 pictures are not steps to climb. They are not achievements to be unlocked. They are reminders that peace is not found by pushing away chaos, but by walking into it with awareness. That the mind is not something to conquer, but to understand. That discipline is not rigidity, but consistency born of care. And that the end of the path is not escape, but return. Every person lives aspects of these stages every day. The ox is lost in the morning meeting, found again in a breath, tamed in a moment of silence, pulled wild again in conflict, resting in meditation, forgotten in rush-hour traffic. Each return is valid. Each distraction is part of the story. The key is not to rush, not to compare, not to label yourself based on where you think you are. The pictures hold space for all of it, for the search, for the frustration, for the glimpses of stillness, for the letting go that deepens without effort, for the return to simplicity that doesn't need explanation. They remind us that this path is not about fixing the mind, but learning how to walk with it, how to listen to it without obeying it, how to guide it without punishing it. This journey, mapped in ink and silence, tells the truth of what real peace looks like. Not glossy, not perfect, but honest, rooted, lived. It speaks not to the one who wants to escape the world, but to the one who wants to live in it without being pulled by every wave of thought. It is the story of taming not through control, but through understanding. It is a story that continues in each breath you take. In each moment, you notice the ox wandering. In each quiet return to presence, no matter how many times you've forgotten. And in that return, again and again, you become both the one who searches and the one who has always been home. After tracing the winding steps of the ox-herding journey, something essential comes to light, not as a destination, but as a shift in how presence is held. The return to simplicity, to the ordinary world, is not about displaying a final state of enlightenment or a blooming moment of clarity. It's about walking quietly in the same earth where everything began. And in that earth, thick, messy, full of shadow, the next teaching unfolds. This one doesn't celebrate the blossom of spiritual success. It looks at the ground itself. The teaching is simple, but radical. What if the mud is enough? In many traditions, especially those influenced by metaphor and symbol, the lotus flower has become shorthand for awakening, a beautiful thing rising from dirty water, a symbol of transformation, purity, and triumph over suffering. But what's often missed is that the mud wasn't a mistake. The mud wasn't just a background. The mud was the condition. The lotus cannot exist without it. Yet the mind still tries to skip ahead, still tries to escape the parts that feel heavy, imperfect, unresolved, still searches for the bloom. This teaching asks a deeper question. What if transformation isn't the goal? What if peace is found not in overcoming pain, but in turning toward it without demand? What if the beauty isn't the flower, but the way the mud holds it? The mind is trained to look for results, to link effort with reward, to use spiritual practice as a path toward something better. But this tendency brings stress into the very heart of the practice. Every meditation becomes a test. Every still moment is measured. Progress becomes a new form of currency. The inner voice keeps score. Am I calmer? Did I let go? Did I grow? And when results don't appear, disappointment follows. Frustration grows. Practice turns heavy, not because of its content, but because of the expectation of a bloom. But Buddhist teaching is not about performance. It is not about producing results that can be displayed, named, or used to compare. It's about meeting the mud. Sitting with what's here, even if it's messy, incomplete, or confusing. It's about stepping away from the need to harvest flowers and instead learning how to soften inside the soil of your own life. Not to fix it, but to know it. Not to escape it, but to be with it in a way that doesn't require it to be different. This reframes suffering. It stops being a problem to solve and becomes an experience to understand. Pain doesn't always teach through removal. Sometimes it teaches through presence, through persistence, through the quiet awareness that something difficult is here and it is not being rejected. This changes the nervous system. It changes the breath. It allows the body to stop bracing. Because the war with discomfort is over. Many people come to practice hoping to be released from what they feel. But the practice says, feel more, feel clearly, feel without adding the extra layer of resistance. The suffering that says this shouldn't be happening, this shouldn't feel this way. The extra narrative that makes mud seem like failure. But mud is not failure. It is the raw material of awakening. In fact, the moments that shape us most are rarely the polished ones. The wisdom that stays often comes not from clarity, but from confusion, not from stillness, but from chaos, not from joy, but from grief that was met with full presence. The lotus becomes less important than the one who stopped searching for it and began to sit in the mud without fear. This kind of peace is quiet. It's not the peace of resolution, but the peace of no longer needing resolution. It doesn't erase pain. It removes the demand for pain to go away. And in that space, something shifts. Suffering loses its grip when it's no longer required to mean something. It becomes what it is, just this, a wave in the field of awareness. A chapter, not the whole story. The desire for transformation is understandable. Pain hurts, fear stings, shame lingers. Of course the mind wants release, But the moment that desire turns into a condition, peace becomes postponed. The message becomes, I will rest when this changes. But what if rest is available inside the mud? What if clarity is not something you reach, but something that comes when you stop demanding that life be anything other than what it is? This teaching goes deeper than acceptance. Acceptance still implies that something unpleasant is being tolerated. This is about intimacy, about the kind of full contact that no longer resists even the hard edges of experience, the kind of presence that no longer sees mud as an obstacle, but as a place to rest, a place to breathe, a place to live without pressure to escape. This doesn't mean giving up on growth. It means redefining it. Growth no longer means moving upward into something shinier. It means deepening into what's already here. Noticing subtle changes, more softness, more patience, more ability to stay with discomfort without reacting. These are not flowers, these are roots. And roots are what hold everything steady when the weather changes. In Zen, there's a saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Nothing changes except the way experience is held. The mud remains, the mess remains. But the war is over. This is what maturity looks like, not perfection, but stability. Not floating above life, but walking in it without the need to rearrange everything. Even in meditation, the mind wants to bloom. It wants bliss, stillness, light. And when those don't come, it says the practice is failing. But the mud is the practice, the wandering thoughts, the restless body, the boredom. These are not distractions. They are the field. They are the teaching. To sit with them is to sit with yourself, not a better version, the real one. This also changes how compassion works. When the lotus is the goal, compassion can become conditional. You help others as a way to feel like a good person. You forgive to complete a healing arc. But when the mud is enough, compassion is quieter. You stop needing others to heal for you to feel okay. You stop needing your own wounds to be inspiring. You meet people in their mess because you've stopped running from your own. There's a deep stillness in this teaching, a kind of contentment that isn't loud or impressive. It doesn't try to convert anyone. It doesn't make bold declarations. It just breathes. It walks. It lives fully in the ordinary. And that ordinariness becomes sacred, not because something big has happened, but because nothing needs to happen. This is hard for the modern mind to grasp. Everything is built on achievement, on moving forward, on proof. But Buddhist practice is not linear. It's circular. It returns to the same places with new eyes. It touches the same mud with a softer hand. It learns how to stay, not how to escape. And in that staying, you begin to see beauty in places that used to feel like problems. The small moments that don't need to lead anywhere. The pauses that don't need to be filled. The breath that doesn't need to be changed. Each one a moment of contact. Each one a thread in the fabric of presence. Even language shifts in this space. There's less explanation, less analysis, more silence, more breath, more willingness to sit beside something without fixing it, to let it be what it is without trying to give it meaning. Not because meaning is wrong, but because sometimes peace lives in the absence of interpretation. The teaching of mud without lotus is not against transformation. It simply points to the fact that transformation doesn't always look the way the mind expects. Sometimes it's invisible. Sometimes it's just the fact that you didn't run this time, that you stayed, that you didn't force a lesson or try to rise above, that you were with what hurt without needing it to heal. And maybe that's the real flower. Not something that grows out of the mud, but something that grows within it. A different kind of beauty. The kind that doesn't need to be seen, doesn't need to be named, just lived, quietly, fully, without reward, without end. When the beauty in the mud is finally seen as complete without needing to bloom, something else gently starts to reveal itself. Not through more effort, not through more words, but through the absence of both. The space that opens when there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to fix, nothing more to explain. It's not that life becomes silent. It's that the need to speak over it begins to fade. In monastic practice, this is not a concept. It is a lived discipline. It is called noble silence, and it is not just about the absence of noise. It is about a complete reorientation of how the mind relates to sound, to conversation, to identity. The vow of silence taken by monks is not a punishment, nor is it about spiritual elitism. It is a medicine, a direct way of healing the mind from its addiction to constant expression. Words are not the enemy, but their overuse can become a form of self-protection. Talking becomes a habit, a way to avoid discomfort, a strategy to control situations, a shield to keep vulnerability at a distance. In silence, these habits lose their hiding place. The mind is forced to meet itself without distraction. Monastic silence doesn't mean muteness. It means restraint. It means pausing before reacting. It means speaking only when speech is necessary and beneficial. And when that filter is in place, something profound happens. The nervous system begins to reset. The tension that comes from always needing to respond, always needing to express, slowly begins to unwind. There's more breath, more internal space, more time between stimulus and response. Many people are not aware of how exhausting constant communication can be. Not just talking, but the planning of what to say, the fear of saying the wrong thing, the performance of being seen. Even casual conversations can wear the mind thin when done without awareness. The vow of silence removes this weight. It allows energy to be preserved, redirected inward. It shifts the emphasis from performance to presence. In monastic life, silence is not emptiness. It is full of listening, full of watching, full of intimate attention to life as it is. When no words are spoken, other senses sharpen. Sounds are more vibrant. Body language becomes more nuanced. Thought patterns become more visible. And in that clarity, a deeper level of self-understanding arises. Strategic silence can be integrated into everyday life without living in a monastery. Even a few hours a day without speech, especially in the morning or evening, can bring noticeable shifts. The first thing most people notice is resistance, a discomfort with stillness, a pressure to speak, to fill the space. But if that edge is met with patience, what follows is insight. The mind starts to show its patterns more clearly. The inner chatter becomes easier to track, and with that tracking, the grip of those patterns loosens. One of the hidden powers of noble silence is how it removes the need to constantly reinforce a personality. Every time we speak, we reinforce who we think we are, the opinions we hold, the jokes we make, the role we play. Silence interrupts this cycle. It allows the person to step back from their own image, to see where identity has been stitched together by repetition, and in that stepping back, there is rest, the kind of rest that no amount of sleep can provide. This rest is not just mental, it's physiological. The body softens when it doesn't need to defend itself through language, when it doesn't need to protect, explain, justify, or convince. The breath deepens, the shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches. Over time, the baseline of stress begins to shift, not because the world is quieter, but because the internal urge to shape it through words has eased. In silence, old emotions surface. Thoughts that have been drowned out by conversation come forward. This can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is essential, because what rises is what has been waiting to be seen. Without the outlet of constant dialogue, the inner world begins to speak in its own way, not in sentences, but in sensations, in images, in intuitive knowing. Monks are trained to welcome this. They sit with what arises, not needing to narrate it or explain it. This builds resilience, emotional stability, a kind of inner spaciousness that doesn't collapse under discomfort. That space becomes a refuge, not because it's filled with pleasant thoughts, but because it's no longer ruled by thought. This kind of presence transforms how relationships are held. When you are not speaking just to be heard, the words you do choose carry more weight. Communication becomes intentional. Listening becomes active. Silence between people no longer feels awkward. It feels profound. It becomes a shared space of respect, not an empty void to be filled. Even short periods of daily silence can bring this clarity. Morning silence allows you to meet the day without the immediate rush of reaction. Evening silence allows the mind to settle, digest the events of the day, and release the need to keep performing. These moments become anchors, not escapes. They ground you in something deeper than explanation. Noble silence also dissolves the illusion that everything must be fixed through dialogue. Not every emotion needs to be expressed to be released. Not every misunderstanding needs to be solved in words. Sometimes what's needed is space, stillness, a shared pause where both people drop their defenses and simply rest in presence together. In that space, healing can happen without effort. This is not a silence of avoidance. It is not the silence of resentment, repression, or fear. It is a silence chosen with awareness, held with intention, grounded in compassion. The kind of silence that softens rather than hardens, that opens rather than isolates. In this silence, the mind becomes less reactive, less eager to jump in, less afraid of not being heard. It becomes more patient, more discerning. It starts to ask better questions. Do I need to say this? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Will it bring peace? And sometimes the answer is yes, but often the answer is no. And in those moments, silence becomes wisdom. The vow of noble silence does not mean forever. Monks still speak, but they speak from a different place, from clarity, from alignment, from necessity rather than habit. This same alignment can be cultivated outside monastery walls, by watching speech, by noticing the energy behind it, by pausing before reacting, by creating regular windows of stillness in a noisy world. In a time where constant communication is normalized, choosing silence can feel radical, but its effects are ancient. They touch something beneath thought, a kind of knowing that is not intellectual but intuitive, a wisdom that doesn't need to be spoken to be true, a depth that reveals itself only when the surface stills. Silence is not empty. It is the space where everything unnecessary falls away, where the truth of the moment is no longer buried under explanation, where presence becomes enough. And in that enoughness, there is peace. Not because everything is understood, but because the need to understand everything is finally quiet. When silence is no longer seen as absence, but as sanctuary, something shifts in how life is approached. Speech loses its compulsion, identity loses its echo chamber, and with fewer words reinforcing old stories, a space opens up, not just around the mind, but within it. In that space, the question arises, if no one is listening, who am I performing for? Who is this role being upheld for? The stress that once lived in constant output begins to reveal its source, not in the world's demands, but in the self's clinging to a role that feels necessary for worth, for belonging, for recognition. The weight of identity doesn't always show itself in loud declarations. Often, it appears in the quiet tension of needing to be someone. And this tension, subtle, relentless, can drain the spirit more than chaos ever could. The life of Siddhartha before becoming the Buddha offers a direct human reflection of this tension. He was not born into difficulty. He was not raised in hardship. He had everything the world says should bring peace, status, power, admiration, luxury, lineage. He had a role so secure that millions would have accepted it without question. Yet what he felt inside that golden world was not freedom. It was confinement. And it wasn't because the palace was flawed. It was because no outer role could resolve the inner knowing that something was missing. Siddhartha's choice to walk away was not rejection. It was recognition. Recognition that no amount of comfort could compensate for a life disconnected from truth. That no identity, no matter how praised, could silence the deeper pull of awareness, and that staying would mean betraying that awareness. This kind of clarity doesn't come from rebellion. It comes from honesty. The kind of honesty that looks at a life full of success and still says, this is not peace. The roles we carry, parent, provider, achiever, leader, often begin in love. We step into them to serve, to support, to grow. But over time, those same roles can harden. What began as connection turns into pressure. Expectations pile up. The self becomes reduced to function, and the human being inside the role begins to disappear. There is no space to ask who you are beneath the title, beneath the responsibility, because everything has been shaped around keeping the identity alive. Letting go of roles doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means remembering that identity is not the same as truth. You can be a parent without being consumed by the role of parenting. You can lead without building your self-worth on leadership. You can support others without losing yourself in the image of being supportive. The Buddha didn't walk away from his family out of coldness. He walked towards something wider, something that couldn't be lived within the narrow container he had inherited. And from that journey, he returned not smaller, but deeper. The stress of roles often comes from trying to fulfill every expectation that comes with them. There's no end point, no arrival. Only more to prove, more to maintain, more to manage. Even moments of rest become tasks. Even love becomes pressure. And beneath all of it is the fear. If I stop performing this role, who will I be? Buddhist practice invites this question without panic. It holds space for the inquiry, not the answer. It says that who you are is not fixed, not dependent on achievement or approval, that the self is not a job title, a family position, a reputation. These things shift. They can be carried, honored, and released, but they are not the foundation. They are not the one watching it all unfold. Letting go of identity roles is not an external decision. It's an inner movement. It's the loosening of the grip that says, I must be this or I have failed. It's the space to ask what role you are clinging to and what fear is driving that clinging. Is it the fear of not being needed? The fear of being ordinary? The fear of being forgotten? These questions are not to be answered quickly. They are to be lived through with compassion. The Buddha's path was one of subtraction, not addition. He didn't build a new identity. He shed the layers of falsehood, not because identity is evil, but because it is temporary. And clinging to what's temporary creates suffering. Every role ends, every title shifts, every image fades. What remains is not a better version of the self. What remains is awareness, untouched by the roles it once wore. This perspective frees the heart, because you no longer need to hold up a mask to be loved. You no longer need to perform resilience when you feel exhausted. You no longer need to act wise when you feel confused. You can show up as you are, not as who the role says you should be. And in that honesty, deeper connection becomes possible, because now you are relating from presence, not performance. Roles often come with scripts, things you're supposed to say, ways you're supposed to act. But those scripts can become cages. When the role becomes more important than the reality of the moment, you lose contact with what's actually true. You start to defend the image of the role rather than respond from clarity. This creates tension, internal conflict, the sense of living behind glass, never quite free to breathe. The Buddha didn't choose poverty for its own sake. He chose authenticity. He chose the path that allowed him to meet life directly, without insulation. And in doing so, he found a kind of richness that status could never provide, a mind unburdened by the constant upkeep of a story. This teaching is not about rejecting your life. It's about seeing where your identity has become a prison, where the pressure to be something is stealing the ability to be here. You can still show up. You can still fulfill your responsibilities, but with less tension, less fear, less attachment to how it all looks. You are not the role you play. You are the one playing it. And the more you rest in that awareness, the more gracefully the roles can come and go. You can be strong without hiding your weakness. You can lead without needing control. You can give without forgetting yourself. The role becomes fluid, something you wear, not something you are. There is relief in this. the relief of not having to get it right all the time, of not needing to uphold an image of perfection, of being able to say, "I don't know," and still be whole, of recognizing that you were never meant to be one fixed thing. You were meant to be here, fully, freely, awake. The Buddha's life didn't end with renunciation. It began with it. What he walked away from was illusion, and what he found was clarity, not in ideas, but in direct experience. This clarity is available now, not through escape, but through honesty, through the willingness to sit with the parts of your identity that are trying too hard, the parts that are afraid, the parts that don't know who they are without applause. Meeting these parts with compassion is how the grip loosens, not by cutting them off, but by holding them gently, by seeing the fear behind the role, and by remembering that presence doesn't need to be anyone. It already is everything, without title, without costume, just breath, just awareness, just this. This is not the end of your role. It's the beginning of playing it with peace, of carrying it lightly, of stepping in and out with grace. Because now you know the truth. You were never the mask. You were always the light behind it, silent, watching, free. When the weight of roles is finally set down, the breath softens. The mind no longer burns energy holding together an image. What remains is a kind of quiet balance, not forced, not held, simply present. And in this subtle stillness, the body begins to speak, not through words, but through sensation. Tightness loosens, the pulse steadies. There is a deep recognition that life does not need to swing between extremes to feel meaningful. There is peace in the middle, not as a compromise, but as a refuge. This is the heart of the Buddhist middle path, and long before modern science had the language for it, the Buddha pointed to what we now call the nervous system's window of tolerance, a space where the body and mind are regulated, resilient, and at ease. The middle path was not a theory. It was the Buddha's lived discovery. After years of indulgence and years of severe deprivation, he realized that both ends created suffering. Pleasure without restraint led to confusion. Pain without rest led to collapse. Peace wasn't found in pushing or in escaping. It was found in presence, in the simplicity of being awake without being overwhelmed, engaged without being consumed. This was not a rejection of intensity. It was a wise turning toward what allows stability. Modern neuroscience offers a mirror to this ancient insight. It speaks of the window of tolerance, a zone where the nervous system is neither hyper-aroused nor shut down. Within this window, humans are able to think clearly, feel fully, and respond wisely. When the nervous system moves above this window, the result is fight or flight, anxiety, anger, restlessness. When it drops below, the result is freeze, numbness, depression, disconnection. The middle way is not just a path between philosophies, it's a path through physiology. Understanding this brings new clarity to Buddhist practices. Meditation is not just about quieting the mind, it's about anchoring the nervous system in its natural window. Breathwork, mindful walking, ethical conduct, all are designed to support this balance. They keep the system from tipping into chaos or collapse. They offer a structure where emotional storms can pass without drowning the practitioner, and within that structure, the mind learns how to stay. Staying doesn't mean rigidity. It means flexibility with awareness. A regulated nervous system isn't always calm. It adapts, it responds, but it returns to balance more easily. It doesn't stay hijacked by old patterns or overwhelmed by future fears. This is the ground where wisdom becomes possible, not because intensity disappears, but because intensity no longer controls. The Buddha taught moderation not as moral restraint, but as psychological freedom. When people chase pleasure without end, they exhaust themselves. When they deny themselves joy out of guilt, they wither. Neither leads to liberation. Both are based on craving, either for more or for none. The middle path asks a different question. What sustains clarity? What supports awareness? What allows the heart to remain open and the body to remain steady? This balance is deeply personal. For one person, it may mean simplifying commitments. For another, it may mean adding movement into stillness. What matters is not the form, but the effect. Does this action bring you into your window of tolerance? Does it allow you to meet life without being pulled apart by it? Does it support your ability to be with what is, without tipping into numbness or panic? The teachings on the middle path also protect against spiritual extremes. Some seekers turn practice into another performance. They push too hard, sit too long, fast too deeply, not out of wisdom, but out of spiritual ambition. Others avoid the practice altogether, thinking peace will arrive without effort. But both approaches bypass the point. Discipline without gentleness becomes harm. Gentleness without direction becomes drift. The middle way honors both. Effort and ease. Stillness and action. Silence and speech. This balance supports not just the mind, but the entire body. When the nervous system is regulated, digestion improves, sleep deepens, immunity strengthens, relationships become more stable, decisions become clearer. The body is not in constant survival mode. It doesn't have to prepare for imagined danger. It doesn't burn energy defending against the present moment. It can settle into now, and this settling is where insight grows. Insight is not just a mental event. It is a whole-body clarity, a moment when everything aligns, emotion, thought, sensation, and reveals truth without force. These moments cannot be summoned by intensity. They appear when the system is balanced, open, quiet enough to listen. This is why the Buddha taught mindfulness not as detachment, but as intimacy with what is. The more balanced the system, the more intimacy becomes possible. The middle path also changes how people view discomfort. In an unregulated state, discomfort feels dangerous. It triggers reactivity. It creates urgency. But within the window of tolerance, discomfort can be witnessed, held, understood. It doesn't have to be fixed right away. It can be met with curiosity. And this meeting begins to untangle the patterns that once felt permanent. Practices like loving kindness, ethical speech, and right livelihood are not just moral guides. They are nervous system supports. They reduce internal conflict. They limit the stress of dishonesty, betrayal, and self-aggression. They create inner conditions where the body can rest in alignment, and from that rest, resilience is built, not as armor, but as capacity. Capacity is the key. The goal is not to avoid difficulty, but to expand the ability to remain present within it. The middle path is a training in expanding that space, the space between thought and action, between feeling and reaction, between trigger and response. And each time that space grows, suffering decreases. Not because life becomes easier, but because the mind is no longer overwhelmed by it. This is not a fragile peace, it's a grounded peace, one that knows how to feel grief without collapsing, how to feel joy without clinging, how to walk through conflict without turning it into identity. It's not about living in neutrality, it's about living in integration, holding all parts of yourself without being pushed out of your center. This is also where self-compassion becomes essential, because staying in balance requires gentleness. It requires the ability to notice when you're pushing too hard or pulling away too fast. It requires listening to your own limits without shame and honoring them as part of the path, not obstacles to it. Monastic routines are built around this principle, not to control, but to support. Regular meals, balanced effort, time for silence, time for work. These rhythms are not rigid, they are medicine. They teach the body and mind how to move together, how to trust each other, how to return to balance after being thrown off. This rhythm can be brought into any life, through daily pauses, mindful meals, digital rest, honest boundaries. It doesn't require retreat, it requires attention, a willingness to tune in and ask, what does this moment need? More stillness or more movement? More structure or more space? The middle path is not one formula. It is a constant act of listening, and the more you listen, the more the nervous system learns safety. Not from the world outside, but from how you meet the world inside. That sense of inner safety is what allows transformation. Not because life gets quieter, but because your foundation becomes stronger. The mind doesn't break under pressure. The body doesn't retreat under fear. There is space, enough space to stay, enough space to grow. This is why the middle path is not the middle of passivity. It is the middle of mastery. Not control over life, but alignment within it. Not detachment from emotion, but the capacity to meet it fully. Not avoidance of extremes, but the ability to move through them without being lost. The Buddha did not teach balance as a luxury. He taught it as liberation, a state where the mind is no longer swinging between craving and aversion, a state where the nervous system is no longer hijacked by habit, a state where each moment is met on its own terms without needing to be changed. This is the wisdom of the middle, not too tight, not too loose, not holding on, not pushing away. Just enough presence to see clearly, just enough ease to feel fully, just enough effort to stay awake. And when this balance is found, peace stops being a concept. It becomes the natural resting state of a system no longer at war with itself. When the nervous system begins to trust the balance of the present, when extremes no longer pull the mind into survival, a deeper stillness is revealed, one that doesn't depend on outer peace, but on inner alignment. That stability opens a new kind of vision, not outward, but inward, a quiet recognition that the source of much suffering is not what happens, but how the mind meets it, not the events themselves, but the thinking patterns formed long before the moment arrives. And this is where the ancient insight of karma takes an unexpected turn, not as fate, not as punishment, but as the echo of thought itself. Not just actions, but inner habits that shape the landscape of every feeling, every choice, every reaction. Karma is often misunderstood as something external, a ledger of right and wrong tracked by the universe. But the deeper teaching goes further. Karma is not only what is done, it is also what is thought. Each thought is a seed, and each seed, when repeated, creates a climate in the mind. Over time, these thought seeds grow roots. They become habits. They shape perception. They change the nervous system, and they begin to create emotional weather before life even speaks. A thought is never just a thought. It is an act, a small one, but real. It triggers sensation in the body. It generates emotion. It builds pathways in the brain. It lays groundwork for future reactions. A fearful thought, repeated often, doesn't stay neutral. It becomes the lens through which everything else is seen. A judgmental thought doesn't just stay about someone else, it becomes how the mind treats itself. This is the karma of thought, its weight, its consequence, its continuity. The soil of the mind is not passive. It grows what is planted. And if stress is growing, it means certain seeds are being fed too often. Thoughts of unworthiness, thoughts of urgency, thoughts of comparison, thoughts that replay the past or forecast fear. None of them are wrong in isolation. But when they become habitual, when they are planted daily, they crowd out peace. They create a mental field where suffering grows more easily than joy. This doesn't mean policing every thought. That becomes another form of control. It means noticing which thoughts are getting sunlight, which ones are being watered with attention, which ones are quietly becoming your emotional climate. The mind is always cultivating something. Noticing what that is allows the pattern to shift, not with force, but with presence. Presence is what changes the quality of thinking, not by stopping thought, but by watching it, seeing it arise, run its course, and fade. When seen clearly, many thoughts lose their charge. Their reality softens. They begin to be recognized not as facts, but as mental weather. Temporary, conditioned, not personal. This recognition is not passive, it's transformative. Because once a thought is seen as optional, something else can be chosen. A new seed can be planted. A new habit can be formed, one that supports regulation rather than chaos, one that builds compassion rather than contraction. This is not the creation of positive thinking. It's the return to natural thinking, unclouded, grounded, and wise. The Buddha did not teach that all thoughts were harmful. He taught that unwholesome thoughts lead to suffering. Wholesome thoughts lead to peace. And the difference is not about morality, it's about effect. Does this thought constrict the body or relax it? Does it generate fear or openness? Does it isolate or connect? These questions are not intellectual, they are somatic, felt in the body long before they're understood by the mind. Changing the soil of the mind means shifting attention, giving less energy to the thoughts that spiral and more energy to the ones that stabilize. It means practicing thoughts like compassion, gratitude, patience, not to fake a feeling, but to train a new habit. Every time the mind returns to presence, it's planting a seed, and over time, those seeds bloom into new emotional landscapes. This practice is not about perfection. Thoughts will still arise, some pleasant, some painful. The goal is not to stop them, but to relate differently, to stop following the ones that harm, to stop arguing with the ones that judge, to stop believing the ones that say you are broken. These thoughts don't vanish right away, but they lose power when they are not fed. Mental habits are often inherited, formed early, passed down from culture, family, experience. They shape how safety is perceived, how love is received, how success is defined. But once they are seen, they can be softened. The mind is not fixed. It adapts. And awareness is the beginning of that adaptation. Even subtle shifts in thought create real change. A moment of patience instead of frustration. A breath before reacting. A silent blessing instead of a complaint. These small mental actions are karmic. They shape the next moment. They create conditions where calm becomes easier, where kindness feels more natural, where reactivity fades. Meditation sharpens this awareness. It shows how thoughts come and go, how attachment to them creates suffering. It offers a training ground, a way to see the thought without becoming it, to feel the emotion without letting it decide everything, to witness the storm without being blown off-center. Each time this is practiced, a new groove is carved, a new path is opened, and that new path is freedom, not from thought, but from the tyranny of unconscious thought, from the loops that run without question, from the reactions that feel automatic. Thought will always arise, but with awareness, it stops being the master. It becomes a tool, useful, but no longer in control. This insight transforms how challenges are met. A difficult moment no longer adds to stress unless the mind adds to it. Thoughts like, "This shouldn't be happening," or "I can't handle this," are not truths. They are seeds. If they are repeated, believed, rehearsed, they grow suffering. But if they are seen as habits, they can be paused, replaced, or simply allowed to pass. The same applies to how we think about others. Thoughts of blame, envy, or resentment plant seeds that keep the heart constricted. They don't just affect relationships, they affect the climate inside. The more those seeds grow, the less space there is for ease. Letting go of them isn't about becoming good. It's about becoming free. Even the way we think about spiritual practice can become karmic. Thoughts like, "I'm not progressing," or "I should be more peaceful," carry stress. They turn practice into pressure. But if these thoughts are recognized, named, held with care, they lose their grip. And the practice becomes what it was always meant to be, a return, not a race. The soil of the mind changes with consistency, not force. It shifts with repetition, not ambition. One thought, seen clearly. One breath, returned to. One judgment, released. These are the actions that change karma, not in the cosmos, but in the chemistry of being, in the way today becomes tomorrow, in the way experience is held. The Buddha taught that intention is the beginning of karma, not outcome, not reward. Intention, the inner movement behind the thought. This means the shift doesn't start outside. It starts in how thought is approached, with curiosity instead of critique, with awareness instead of avoidance, with gentleness instead of judgment. Each thought is a seed. Each seed is a choice, and each choice shapes the next moment's soil. Over time, this changes everything, not through control, but through care. Not through perfection, but through presence. The kind of presence that sees clearly, holds softly, and plants only what it wants to grow. When the seeds of thought are no longer planted unconsciously, when attention turns from habit to clarity, a new awareness begins to rise. The noise of mental clutter softens, not through avoidance, but through precision. The mind starts to crave less, not out of effort, but because the chaos that once felt familiar now feels heavy. In that stillness, something ancient reawakens, the deep peace found in simplicity. Not the kind of simplicity found in empty rooms or bare closets, but in the untouched spaces of a quiet mind. This is the heart of monastic minimalism, not a trend or aesthetic, but a way of life shaped by the understanding that inner space only expands when life becomes lighter, slower, quieter from the inside out. Monastics live with few belongings, not because they reject the material world, but because they understand the weight each object can carry. Not the physical weight, but the emotional tether, the mental noise that attaches to ownership. Every item carries stories, preferences, memories, responsibilities. Every choice multiplies thought. By reducing possessions, they reduce decisions. By reducing decisions, they reduce distraction. This isn't deprivation, it's refinement. The fewer the things, the easier it becomes to notice what truly matters, and what truly matters is rarely what can be touched. But the real minimalism in monastic life happens beyond the visible. It lives in the architecture of the mind. A monk's commitment is not just to simplify the room, but to simplify the mental landscape. Fewer possessions are only useful if they reflect fewer entanglements, fewer assumptions, fewer opinions clung to like shields. Every morning chant, every walk in silence, every repetition of breath is not about tradition alone. It is about trimming what is unnecessary. The inner narrative that says more is better. The egoic story that says, I need to hold more to be more. Cognitive minimalism begins when awareness starts watching not just what is thought, but how often and why. Monastics train not to stop thinking, but to stop rehearsing unhelpful thinking. There is a difference between thought and mental accumulation. Thought serves. Accumulation suffocates. The same thought repeated without clarity becomes a storm of noise. Worries about what hasn't happened. Replays of conversations. Predictions of failure. These are mental hoardings. They fill the internal space with tension and dull the light of direct perception. Letting go of this weight is not easy, but it is possible. It begins with attention, a practice of gently catching when the mind returns to the same loops, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What is this thought doing? Is it solving anything or just replaying? Is it opening the heart or closing it? A monk asks this silently, moment by moment. And in that asking, the clutter begins to fade, not through force, but through clarity. This same clarity applies to emotion. Emotional minimalism is not about suppressing feeling. It's about simplifying the relationship to emotion. Many people complicate their inner world by adding interpretation to every feeling. Sadness arises, and the mind says it shouldn't be here. Anger comes, and the mind labels it as failure. The feeling itself is not the burden, the commentary around it is. Monastics learn to let emotion move without added meaning. A feeling is just that, a wave, not a judgment. In this way, emotional space widens. Simplifying the emotional field also means not adding unnecessary drama to experience, not dramatizing discomfort, not escalating the inner narrative to match the outer situation. Someone speaks harshly, and instead of feeding the mind with endless loops of resentment or defense, the monastic mind returns to silence. Not to suppress, but to observe without escalation. This return is not passive. It is powerful. It is what allows peace to be felt in the middle of storms. The external life of a monk mirrors the internal architecture. Days are structured with rhythm, not excess. Meals are simple, not because of scarcity, but because complexity pulls attention outward. Clothing is uniform, not out of restriction, but because fashion becomes one less thing to manage. Speech is measured, not because expression is bad, but because words, when unchecked, quickly scatter presence. The point is not austerity. It is liberation from the noise of unnecessary decisions. This same principle can be brought into modern life. One does not need to live in a monastery to benefit from monastic simplicity. It begins with asking what takes up space in the mind, what responsibilities are self-imposed, what emotional burdens are being carried out of habit rather than necessity, what stories are being rehearsed that no longer serve. These questions don't lead to immediate change, but they begin the clearing. Digital clutter is one modern layer of cognitive excess. Constant messages, updates, media, all of it becomes a mental diet of fragmentation. The mind is constantly jumping, comparing, consuming. Monastics limit this not because information is bad, but because too much information erodes inner stillness. The more inputs the mind receives, the more scattered it becomes. Reclaiming simplicity means reclaiming attention. This means saying no more often, not to people, but to unnecessary mental noise. Saying no to scrolling when stillness would serve more. Saying no to arguing when silence would bring clarity. Saying no to proving something when presence is already enough. This is the heart of minimalism, not living with less for the sake of less, but saying no to everything that doesn't feed peace. Even the way we define self can be minimized. Most identity is built around accumulation. I am my job, my story, my trauma, my success. But every layer added becomes something to protect, something to fear losing. Monastics don't erase identity, but they hold it lightly. They recognize that the self, when clung to, becomes heavy. Every belief, every label, every past wound carried as truth becomes baggage. The more of it that is put down, the freer the walk becomes. This freedom doesn't make life less meaningful. It makes it clearer. It reveals joy in ordinary moments. It allows appreciation to rise without the need for spectacle. It brings gratitude for silence, for breath, for the quiet presence of things that don't shout for attention. These are not small gains. They are the foundation of a mind that can truly rest. Monastic minimalism also protects energy. Every distraction, every worry, every complicated plan drains life force. When the unnecessary is cleared, energy begins to return. This isn't just physical, it's mental vitality, creative thought, compassionate awareness, patience. These qualities don't thrive in clutter. They need space. Simplicity makes that space. This is not a call to abandon life's complexity. It's an invitation to stop adding to it unconsciously, to look at the internal and external landscape and ask, what is essential? Not what is trendy, not what is impressive. What is essential for peace, for clarity, for presence? Often the answer is less than expected. A simpler routine, a clearer boundary, a moment of silence instead of explanation. These changes seem small, but they are acts of liberation. Letting go of internal clutter also means letting go of the need to constantly be progressing. Monks don't practice to become someone. They practice to remove what they are not, to clear the fog, not to build an empire. This kind of minimalism is not about shrinking. It is about uncovering. The self beneath roles, the peace beneath pressure, the clarity beneath chaos. This shift is not sudden. It is cultivated, slowly, through repetition, through honesty, through noticing when things feel heavy and asking, what is being held that doesn't need to be? That question, asked daily, becomes a path. Not one of loss, but of return. Return to what is simple, what is spacious, what is silent. And in that silence, everything needed is already here. The practice is not in adding more tools, more teachings, more techniques. It is in subtracting what distracts, refining, distilling, returning again and again to what supports presence, to what brings the nervous system into stillness, to what opens the heart without overstimulating the mind. This is monastic minimalism, not as lifestyle, but as liberation, a quiet, consistent turning away from excess and a turning toward what's real, what breathes, what remains. When the mind no longer clings to accumulation, when even the effort to simplify turns into a natural rhythm of letting go, something deeper than stillness starts to surface. It is not just the peace of having less or the relief of mental quiet. It's the disappearance of the one who needed peace to begin with. The space created by monastic minimalism doesn't only hold clarity. It reveals what has always been there beneath the layers of trying, fixing, naming. In that space, even the observer, the inner watcher so revered in most meditative paths, starts to dissolve. What remains is not an identity, not even a presence that says, I am aware. What remains is being itself, unfiltered and unclaimed. Not watched, not held, simply known by no one as everything. Most meditation practice teaches the value of becoming the observer. To watch thoughts without reaction, to see emotions rise and fall, to hold space for pain without collapsing into it. This witnessing creates distance, and in that distance, freedom. But distance is still duality. It still says, there is me, and there is what I observe. And even in that quiet watching, the subtle sense of self persists, the one who is doing the witnessing. In early stages of practice, this is essential. It brings relief. It breaks identification with the story. It shows that thoughts are not the thinker, and emotions are not identity. But the deeper traditions, especially in non-dual branches of Buddhism, point beyond even this clarity. They point to what happens when the witness is also released, when the line between observer and observed fades, not through effort, but through the exhaustion of holding it. The witness can become a new mask, a refined self-image. I am spiritual because I am always watching. But this watching, too, can be tense. It requires maintaining a stance, a position. It still implies separation. And if separation remains, subtle stress remains. The sense that something must be done to stay in awareness. The belief that stillness requires technique, or that peace depends on maintaining a view. True presence requires nothing. It is not held by effort. It is not strengthened by thinking about it. It is simply what is there when the witness relaxes, when attention is no longer turned outward or inward, when the need to monitor experience disappears. This is not something that can be achieved through analysis. It's not reached by becoming better at practice. It reveals itself when all practice stops, not because of apathy, but because there is nothing left to do. Letting go of the witness does not mean losing awareness. It means seeing that awareness was never something you did. It was always there. It never needed a watcher. The sky does not need a person to look up and confirm it exists. In the same way, presence does not need identification to be real. It is more natural than the breath, more constant than the body. It is what all experience floats within, effortlessly. This is why advanced non-dual teachings often appear paradoxical. They say, there is no one to awaken. There is no observer. There is no path. To the thinking mind, this seems like nonsense. But to the heart that has softened through years of letting go, these are not riddles. They are direct pointers to what remains when identity falls away completely. Stress persists as long as there is something to protect. The ego protects its opinions. The witness protects its stance. But being itself has no shape, nothing to guard, nothing to explain. In that space, stress cannot survive because stress requires a center, a self who resists, reacts, defines. Presence is centerless. It holds everything, resists nothing, and doesn't even claim to be doing so. This doesn't mean life becomes passive. On the contrary, when the witness dissolves, life is met more directly. Action flows from stillness. Words come from silence. Decisions rise without the burden of self-image. There's no longer a calculation of how will this make me appear, or what does this mean about me, because the me that needed that story has faded into the background. There's a gentleness in this space that no method can produce. It cannot be performed. It cannot be taught in steps. It arrives when all steps are forgotten, when the mind is no longer trying to navigate, but simply allows what is to unfold. This is not indifference. It is intimacy so complete that no watcher remains to separate it. Even the idea of spiritual progress can keep the witness alive. I'm getting closer. I'm more present now than before. These are still markers, still signs of someone evaluating experience. But presence beyond the witness doesn't measure. It doesn't compare. It doesn't improve. It simply is. And because it has no shape, it can't be lost. It's not a state. It's not a mood. It's not even peace as the mind understands it. It is prior to all of that, ever available, untouched. In Zen, there is a saying, "The foot feels the foot when it touches the ground." That's what this is. Awareness without the middleman. Experience without the observer. The hand moves. The sound comes. The breath flows. There is no one orchestrating, no one reflecting, no one needing to define it as presence. Just the thing itself, as it is. This level of freedom cannot be forced. It doesn't come from trying harder. It comes when trying quietly stops, when even the effort to be aware is let go. This can feel frightening at first, because the ego will say, if I stop watching, I'll fall back into unconsciousness. But this fear is based on misunderstanding. Consciousness is not personal. It's not yours. You don't have to maintain it. You only have to stop pretending it was ever yours to begin with. Monastics who go deep into retreat sometimes speak of the moment when even the watcher disappears, not as a loss, but as the final relief, like a tight fist finally opening. And what is felt is not a grand enlightenment. It's simplicity, reality without commentary, the absence of narrative, the end of inner division. Everything still moves, thoughts still arise, life continues. But no one is claiming ownership. This is not about escaping the world. It's about meeting the world without the filter of the watcher. Not, I am present with this pain, but just pain, fully known. Not, I am watching this sunset, but just sunset, unfiltered. The dissolving of witness is the dissolving of distance, the return to wholeness so complete that nothing is outside of it. And when this becomes clear, even briefly, stress loses its foundation. Because stress only survives when something is at stake, when there is a self to protect, when there is a position to hold, when there is an identity to uphold. Without these, what remains is a kind of trust. Not belief, not hope. Just a knowing that nothing needs to be held together anymore, because nothing was ever separate. This insight does not remove difficulty. Life still brings sorrow, endings, uncertainty, but it removes the layer that makes suffering stick, the resistance that says, this shouldn't be happening to me. The me no longer central. Experience is no longer personal. It is just what's happening. And in that, there is a different kind of strength. Not the strength to endure, but the softness to allow. Words can only point to this. They can't deliver it. But the pointing matters, because somewhere beneath the effort, beneath the watcher, beneath the quiet whisper of, I am aware, there is a presence already alive, already here, already whole. And it asks nothing of you. It only waits for the moment when you stop trying to be present and allow yourself to fall into the presence that never left. That falling is not dramatic. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in a breath, in a pause. In the moment, the mind stops scanning. It cannot be held. It cannot be shown. But once felt, even once, it becomes the new center of gravity. A gravity with no anchor, just openness. Just this. Not watched, not named, just here. When even the witness has faded and there is no longer a sense of someone doing the observing, what remains is a direct encounter with reality as it truly is. Unframed, unfiltered, undivided. The silence is not quietness. but the absence of grasping. The peace is not stillness, but the end of resistance. This shift, though effortless in nature, opens a doorway into something rare and often misunderstood. The dimension where awakening no longer belongs to a person, where awareness is not practiced but simply revealed. And yet, even in this non-personal presence, paths continue to unfold. Some arrive like a lightning strike, others like snow slowly melting into the soil. This is the ground where Satori and Samadhi come into view, not as goals, but as qualities of presence that dissolve stress in entirely different ways. Both Satori and Samadhi point toward mental emptiness, but they do so from radically different directions. To grasp the difference is to understand two archetypal expressions of awakening. One sudden, electric, vertical. The other deep, immersive, horizontal. One feels like breaking through. The other feels like settling in. Both are transformative. Both erase the stress of being entangled with thought. But they reshape the path in distinct ways. Satori, found primarily in the Zen tradition, is a sudden flash of awakening. It is not built over time. It is not developed through stages. It breaks through the structure of mind like a hammer through a mirror. The moment before is confusion. The moment after is clarity. There is no transition, only rupture. Thought collapses, duality falls away, and in its place stands only this, fully known, beyond logic. It is a recognition that needs no explanation. This recognition can be triggered by anything: a sound, a question, a koan that breaks the rhythm of thinking, a moment of complete surrender. Zen masters design environments where the student is constantly being pushed beyond understanding, beyond concepts, beyond language. The mind exhausts itself trying to figure it out, and then, suddenly, it drops. And in that drop, something else is revealed. Not new, not far, always here, but finally seen. The intensity of Satori is unmistakable. It burns through layers of identity in seconds, but like a flash of lightning, it does not always last. It gives a glimpse so pure that nothing is the same afterward, but it doesn't necessarily change the structure of consciousness permanently. It is a gateway, not a resting place. The ego may return, thought may resume, but what was seen cannot be unseen. And that seed becomes a guide, a compass pointing back to reality when the mind starts spinning again. Samadhi, in contrast, arises slowly. It is the stillness cultivated through deep and sustained concentration, often practiced in the Theravada and Vipassana traditions. It does not break the mind open. It quiets it into non-existence. Through breath, through body, through focused attention, the practitioner sinks deeper and deeper into absorption. Distraction fades, identity fades. Eventually, even the perception of time fades. What remains is a calm so complete that thought cannot enter. Unlike Satori, which often comes uninvited, Samadhi is built through dedication. It is grown through repetition, through careful attention to posture, breath, sensation. It teaches the mind to let go, not through shock, but through intimacy. And as the mind learns to rest in this deep absorption, stress melts, not through confrontation, but through dissolution. Anxiety no longer holds, because there is no foothold. The system becomes too calm to react. In Samadhi, there is no peak moment, no flash, no fireworks, only depth. The deeper one goes, the more silence speaks. There is a gradual dissolving of the self, not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle erosion, like waves softening a rock. Over time, what once felt solid becomes porous, then transparent, then gone. The one who was meditating fades into the meditation itself, no distance, no observer, just presence. Satori and Samadhi, then, offer two completely different nervous system experiences. Satori is the sudden dropout of habitual thinking. It cuts through tension like fire. It shocks the system into silence. Samadhi is the extended pause that allows the body and mind to synchronize into harmony. It cools the system slowly, gently reducing stress until only space remains. One is vertical transcendence, the other is horizontal immersion. Both lead to liberation, but the qualities they leave behind are different. Satori often brings a fierce clarity, a kind of spiritual confidence that arises from seeing through illusions so directly. It inspires insight, creativity, boldness. Samadhi leaves a softness, a quiet gentleness that permeates behavior. It brings patience, tenderness, and the capacity to be with life without needing it to be different. Understanding these distinctions matters because different minds respond to different paths. Some are ripe for Satori, a single moment of rupture that changes everything. Others need the gradual rhythm of Samadhi to unwind years of stress, tension, and mental tightness. Neither is superior. Both serve. But recognizing which one resonates allows for more honest practice. Some practitioners chase Satori and become addicted to peak experiences. They measure their spiritual growth by the intensity of moments. But the danger is that they miss the transformation that only consistency brings. Satori can open a door, but if there is no integration, the ego returns with new spiritual stories, new comparisons, new goals. The mind can even become more clever, more subtle in its self-deception, believing that one experience proves awakening. Others attach to the comfort of Samadhi and avoid the razor edge of insight. They sink into stillness but avoid truth. They use peace as a shelter from pain. But Samadhi, at its highest, is not escape. It is absorption into truth, and that absorption must eventually lead to insight, to seeing things as they are, not from a distance, but from the inside out. The balance is in understanding that both states are temporary, and both are pointing to something beyond themselves. Neither Satori nor Samadhi is the goal. They are experiences that remove layers. What remains after them is what matters. What they reveal is the possibility of living without the structures that create stress. Satori shows that awakening is possible now. Samadhi shows that peace is possible here. Together, they dissolve the illusion that something is missing. The stress that dominates daily life rarely survives either of these states, because both cut the link between thought and identity. They interrupt the narrative that says, "This is me, this is mine, this must change." Whether through sudden clarity or deep stillness, the result is the same, the ending of resistance. And in that ending, stress dissolves, not because the world changed, but because the self that was entangled disappeared. These teachings are not only for monks or advanced meditators. They are reminders that the mind holds more potential than it often realizes. That peace is not found in rearranging external conditions, but in accessing the inner space where stress never takes root. Whether that access comes in a flash or over years doesn't matter. What matters is that it is real, and it is possible. Even in daily life, the echoes of Satori and Samadhi can be felt. A moment of stillness while washing a dish, a sudden clarity during a walk, a deep breath that feels like eternity. These are not lesser versions. They are the same truths in smaller frames. Each one is a crack in the wall of stress. Each one a doorway back to presence. The difference between them fades once the need to define experience dissolves. Once there is no one measuring, comparing, or striving, both Satori and Samadhi become expressions of the same thing: the end of separation, the end of grasping, the return to what was always whole. That wholeness cannot be held. It cannot be maintained. It does not belong to anyone. It only shines when the self steps aside. And when that happens, whether suddenly or slowly, what remains is the space where stress never lived. Only stillness, only clarity, only now. All this time, stress whispered the same lie, that peace would come later, after you fixed everything, after you understood more, after you became someone else. But these teachings told a different story, one without pressure, one without delay, one where nothing had to be earned. Through ancient parables, monastic silence, the middle way, and the mind's subtle architecture, one truth kept rising. The moment you stop fighting what is, the peace you've been chasing starts to arrive. Not in the next step, not in the next breath, but here, in the release, in the letting go, in the space behind effort. You've walked through discomfort, grief, craving, identity, and time. You've met the witness. You've seen it dissolve. You've learned how presence isn't something to hold, it's something that holds you. Whether it came as a quiet melt or a sudden flash, whether your path is still forming or already unfolding, something inside you is different now. Not fixed, not perfect, free. If any part of this journey touched you, even in a small way, drop a comment below. Say what you're letting go of. Say what you're finally ready to stop carrying. Or just write, "Peace begins now." Your words might be the thing someone else needed to read tonight. And if you found clarity, comfort, or calm in these hours together, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more waiting for you here. Teachings not just to hear, but to live. Lessons not just to learn, but to become. Until next time, rest deeply, breathe fully, and remember, peace was never far. It's always been this close.